She is far too old to be anyone's bride. The sentence should have been swallowed by the music, hidden beneath the scrape of slippers on polished floorboards and the polite rustle of silk fans, but Lady Cecily Arden heard every word. London, 1819, had trained her to hear such things. A woman who had spent 12 seasons standing at the edge of rooms learned to recognize the exact pitch of pity, the soft scrape of amusement, and the colder note of judgment when it was dressed as good sense. The Mayfair Assembly Room glittered as though no cruel thing had ever been said beneath its chandeliers. Candlelight trembled across gilt mirrors. White-gloved hands lifted glasses of lemonade. Mothers leaned close to daughters whose cheeks were still bright with youth and expectation. Gentlemen arranged themselves in clusters near the doors, pretending indifference while watching dowries move through the room in muslin and pearls. Near the refreshment table, just beyond the warmest circle of light, Cecily stood with her ivory dance card hanging from her wrist by a narrow ribbon that had been mended twice and pressed flat with care. It was a pretty thing, older than most of the girls who now passed her without seeing her. Tiny flowers had been carved along the edge. Her father had given it to her before her first season, when she had been 21 and still believed an empty line was only a beginning. Tonight there were 5 dances written upon it. 2 had been claimed by elderly relations. 1 belonged to a widower who always forgot the steps. 1 had been offered by Mr. Martin Arden because family duty required him to appear attentive. The last was blank, though Cecily had not allowed herself to look at it too often. Looking at empty spaces gave them power. Lady Cecily, Mr. Arden murmured beside her, his smile fixed for the room though his voice was low enough to bruise. Do try not to look as though you are attending a funeral. We are not so secure that we can afford your melancholy. Cecily turned her fan once in her hands. I was under the impression that silence was the most economical expression available to me. His jaw tightened. Martin Arden was her cousin, her trustee in practice if not in every legal particular, and a man who had learned to wear family obligation like a polished pin. He was handsome in the careful way of men who owed money to people they did not name. Wit does not settle accounts, he said. Nor does despair. Smile when Lady Penrith looks this way. Cecily did not smile. Lady Augusta Penrith was already looking. She stood near the centre of the room in a gown the colour of pale gold, one hand resting upon her daughter Rosalie's arm as if the girl were not flesh and feeling but an introduction waiting to be placed. Rosalie Penrith was very young, very fair, and very nervous. She lowered her eyes whenever her mother spoke, and raised them only when commanded by a touch sharp enough to be seen by those who knew how to look. Cecily knew. Women at the edge of rooms noticed many things. They noticed the torn hem hidden by a graceful curtsy. They noticed the smile that vanished when a mother turned away. They noticed when kindness was performed and when fear was powdered until it resembled obedience. His Grace has arrived, someone whispered. The words traveled faster than the first bars of the next dance. Conversation thinned. Fans paused. Mothers straightened daughters by the shoulders. Gentlemen made room without being asked. At the far end of the assembly room, Adrian Lockhart, Duke of Wycliffe, entered as if every candle had been lit to discover whether he approved of them. He was not the oldest man in the room, nor the loudest, nor the most decorated, but rank had a gravity of its own, and his possessed the room at once. He wore black with severe elegance, his cravat tied without flourish, his dark hair brushed back from a face too controlled to be called handsome by the ordinary rules. Yet women looked. Men measured. Hostesses calculated. He gave the impression of a man who had never needed to raise his voice because the world had always bent nearer to hear him. Cecily had seen him twice before, both times from a distance. She knew his reputation. Cold. Exacting. Unmarried by choice, which society treated as strength in a duke and tragedy in a woman. His estate was said to be prosperous, his influence formidable, his patience with matchmaking almost non-existent. Lady Penrith moved first. Cecily watched her guide Rosalie forward through the crowd with the serene violence of a woman arranging a conquest. Your Grace, Lady Penrith said, dipping into a curtsy deep enough to flatter and shallow enough to remind him she was well practiced in rooms like this. London has been intolerably dull without you. Then London must be more fragile than I was told, he replied. His tone was courteous. His eyes were not. Rosalie curtsied. "Your Grace. Miss Penrith." He bowed. Nothing in the exchange should have concerned Cecily. She was not part of it. She was not Rosalie's rival, nor anyone's rival. She had passed beyond the age at which women were placed in competition, or so she had been told in a dozen merciful tones. But Lady Penrith's gaze moved briefly, deliberately, toward the refreshment table. Toward Cecily. "You are hunted too openly, Your Grace," Lady Penrith said, lowering her voice just enough to create intimacy while ensuring anyone useful could still hear. "A man in your position might benefit from a more sensible attachment. Not every bride need be a trembling child with her first bouquet." The Duke's gaze followed hers. It reached Cecily and stopped. For one strange moment the room seemed to narrow around that look. Cecily had expected dismissal. Men had dismissed her for years with practiced kindness, glancing once and then past her, as if unmarried womanhood beyond 30 had rendered her furniture with a pulse. Adrian Lockhart did not look past. He looked directly. His expression revealed nothing, but something in the stillness of him suggested quick assessment. Her gown, silk but altered. Her gloves, clean but not new. Her posture, correct. Her face, composed. Her dance card, nearly empty. Cecily's fingers tightened around her fan. She looked away first. That, at least, was still hers to choose. Lady Penrith continued, her smile a delicate weapon. "Lady Cecily Arden has excellent blood, good manners, and no foolish expectations. A safe older bride can be useful when a duke wishes to silence the marriage market without inviting romantic nonsense." It was not an insult, not in the form that could be challenged. That was Lady Penrith's gift. She could wrap contempt in practicality until it seemed rude to bleed from it. Cecily felt Mr. Arden stiffen beside her, not in defense of her, but in interest. Useful. Safe. Older. The words settled around her like dust. The Duke's face hardened. Later, Cecily would wonder if he meant to condemn the bargain or the woman offered by it. Later, she would have the luxury of nuance. In that moment, she had only the sentence. "She is far too old to be anyone's bride," he said. The music did not stop. The dancers did not falter. No glass shattered. The chandeliers continued to burn with all their golden indifference. Yet Cecily felt the words strike as cleanly as if the entire room had turned to watch. Far too old. Anyone's bride. Not his bride, which would have been simple rejection. Anyone's. He had not merely declined her. He had pronounced her beyond the reach of being chosen at all. Mr. Arden inhaled softly beside her. "Well," he said under his breath, "that was unfortunate." Cecily folded her fan closed. The sound was small. Precise. For whom? He glanced at her. "Do not make a scene." "Have I ever?" That silenced him, because the answer was no. Cecily had spent years not making scenes. She had not made one when her mother's illness kept her from 2 full seasons. She had not made one when her father died and left debts carefully hidden behind courtesy. She had not made one when Martin began speaking of economies while wearing a new watch chain. She had not made one when younger cousins married, when neighbors stopped asking after her prospects, when women her own age brought daughters to be presented and introduced Cecily as Dear Lady Cecily, who knows everyone. She had become useful. Reliable. Unthreatening. A woman invited because she could fill a dinner table, soothe a nervous girl, manage a charity subscription, or sit beside an elderly aunt without complaint. She had not known until that very evening that society had mistaken her silence for consent. Across the room, the Duke's attention had moved back to Lady Penrith, but not comfortably. His jaw was set. Lady Penrith's smile deepened by the smallest degree, as though she had received exactly what she had wanted and was already deciding where to place it. Rosalie looked toward Cecily with sudden, stricken sympathy, then dropped her eyes when her mother's hand tightened on her arm. Cecily saw that too. She saw everything. That was the curse and consolation of being overlooked. "You must remain until supper," Mr. Arden said. "People will notice if you leave now. People have built an art from not noticing me. Cecily." His warning was soft, but his panic was real. Our position cannot bear eccentricity. Our position. Our debts. Our reputation. Her life had been divided into plural burdens and singular loneliness. Cecily looked down at her dance card. The last blank line gleamed faintly beneath the candlelight. For years she had hated that little emptiness, that polite record of what had not been asked. Tonight, for the first time, she felt something colder than shame. She felt clarity. A blank line was not proof that no one wanted her. It was only proof that no one in this room had possessed the courage or imagination to write his name there. She lifted her chin. The movement was small, but Mr. Arden noticed it. So did Lady Penrith. And, from across the room, so did the Duke of Wycliffe. His gaze returned to her just as the first notes of a new dance began. Cecily did not look away this time. She held his stare across the glittering distance, not with flirtation, not with appeal, and certainly not with forgiveness. She looked at him as she might have looked at a man who had dropped a blade and only just realized it had cut someone. A faint change passed over his face. It was not regret. Not yet. But it was recognition. Then Lady Penrith leaned toward her daughter and murmured something Cecily could not hear. Her eyes remained on Cecily's wrist, on the ivory card, on the pale ribbon looped around a hand that had learned not to tremble. The older woman's expression softened into something almost pleasant. Cecily had seen that expression before on card players who had just discovered an ace hidden in their own sleeve. The room resumed its breathing. Laughter rose. Silk moved. A footman passed with lemonade. The Duke was claimed by a circle of gentlemen, and Rosalie was drawn away by her mother like a pale flower pulled from sunlight. Cecily remained near the refreshment table, neither bride nor girl, neither wanted nor entirely invisible now. The sentence still burned where it had entered her, but she would not touch the wound in public. She would not give them that satisfaction. She merely turned her dance card over once, hiding the empty lines against her palm. Lady Penrith watched the gesture. Then her gaze sharpened, and a smile, thin as a paper cut, appeared at the corner of her mouth. The smile on Lady Penrith's mouth did not remain long enough to be called satisfaction, yet Cecily saw it before it vanished behind a fan of painted silk. That was the trouble with standing where no one expected a woman to be dangerous. One learned to observe. Cecily had meant to endure until supper, then claim a headache, take her cloak, and let the night close behind her like a door. It was a modest plan. It asked nothing of anyone. It required only that London look away from her for another half hour, which London had always done with excellent discipline. Mr. Martin Arden, however, seemed determined to keep her displayed. He leaned close enough that his coat sleeve brushed the lace at her cuff. "You must not withdraw," he said, still smiling toward the room. A retreat now would be noticed. "How alarming for everyone," Cecily replied softly. "They might discover I possess movement." His eyes flashed. "This is not the hour for your little remarks." "No. I believe this is the hour for everyone else's." He looked as though he wished to answer more sharply, but a lady in blue muslin passed within earshot, and Martin's expression smoothed at once into cousinly concern. Cecily almost admired the speed of it. Had he ever used such discipline in the management of accounts, Arden House might have been in better repair. Across the room, the Duke of Wycliffe stood among a knot of gentlemen near the card tables, his dark coat severe against their more fashionable colours. He had not approached her. Of course he had not. Men of his rank were allowed a moment of cruelty and then a return to conversation, as if the injury belonged entirely to the person foolish enough to receive it. Yet once, while Lord Ellingham laughed too loudly at some remark, the Duke looked past him. His gaze found Cecily again. She turned her dance card against her palm and refused to let her fingers tighten. She would not perform distress for him. She would not give dignity away simply because he had mishandled his own. "Lady Cecily." The voice was light, feminine, and edged with a sweetness too careful to trust. Miss Rosalie Penrith stood before her, pale curls arranged with the kind of art that appeared effortless only because 3 servants had likely labored over it. She held her fan closed in both hands. "I hope you're not feeling unwell. Mamma said you looked a little faint." Lady Penrith, several yards away, was listening while pretending to correct a fold of her glove. Cecily inclined her head. Your mother is attentive. Rosalie's cheeks colored. She notices everything. So do many mothers in Mayfair. It is why daughters so rarely breathe without permission. The girl's lips parted, then pressed together as if suppressing either a smile or a plea. I didn't mean to intrude. You have not. It's only that I thought, after what was said, you might wish for some company. Cecily studied her. There was no malice in Rosalie's face, only unease. The poor child had been sent like a ribbon tied around a trap. That is very kind of you. Mamma says kindness is often mistaken for weakness. Your mother must have had great experience avoiding the error. Rosalie glanced back. Lady Penrith's fan paused. The girl lowered her voice. Please don't think everyone agreed. It was an impulsive sentence. A dangerous one. Cecily's annoyance softened despite herself. Miss Penrith, a room does not need everyone to agree. It only needs enough people to stay silent. Rosalie's eyes lifted. For one breath she looked almost older than Cecily, not in years, but in the exhausted way of girls trained too early to be agreeable. Then Lady Penrith appeared beside her. My dear Rosalie, Sir Edmund has requested your hand for the next set. Her smile moved to Cecily. Lady Cecily, how composed you are this evening. I have always admired women who understand their place in a room. Then we are united in admiration, Cecily said. I have spent the evening observing several places. Lady Penrith's eyes brightened, not with amusement, but with calculation. How clever. One must find consolation where one can. Rosalie's hand tightened around her fan. Before Cecily could answer, Martin stepped in with polished unease. Lady Penrith, your daughter is much sought after tonight. Youth has its little advantages, Lady Penrith replied. Her gaze dropped, briefly, to Cecily's wrist. Though experience has its uses as well. The next dance was forming. Bodies shifted. Footmen moved along the wall. A gentleman Cecily barely knew bowed to Rosalie, and Lady Penrith guided her daughter away with the light pressure of 2 fingers. Cecily felt the brush of movement at her side and turned just as a footman reached to replace an empty lemonade glass on the refreshment table. Another guest laughed behind her. Someone's shoulder touched hers. It was nothing. It was the kind of small confusion that happened in crowded rooms 100 times each evening. Still, Cecily felt the ribbon at her wrist slacken for one instant, then settle. She looked down. The ivory card was still there. Its pale surface rested against her glove, innocent as bone. Martin had already resumed his watch over the room. You handled that poorly, he murmured. Lady Penrith is not a woman we can afford to offend. I had not realized we were purchasing her approval. In our position, approval is currency. Then we are poorer than even I believed. His mouth thinned. You think yourself above practical concerns because you have never had to answer creditors. Cecily looked at him then. Truly looked. No, Martin. I have answered them in drawing rooms, in kitchens, in letters, and in silence. I have answered them every time someone praised our family's restraint while I sold another piece of my mother's jewelry. The color shifted beneath his skin. Lower your voice. Gladly. It seems to be the family tradition. His reply was cut short by a small cry near the center of the room. A young lady in lavender had stooped to retrieve something from the floor. Her mother, eager to turn accident into entertainment, laughed and said, "What treasure has been discovered now?" The girl held up a card by its ribbon. Cecily's wrist felt suddenly bare. She looked down. Her dance card was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. The torn end of its ribbon rested against her glove, light as a thread of cobweb. "Oh," said the young lady in lavender, smiling with the eager innocence of someone about to do harm for the pleasure of being noticed. "It seems to belong to Lady Cecily Arden." The music faltered, or perhaps Cecily only stopped hearing it. Heads turned by degrees. Martin whispered, "For heaven's sake." Cecily took one step forward. "That is mine. Thank you." But the girl had already glanced at the card. Her smile changed. Curiosity sharpened it. "There is something written here." Her mother reached for it. "My dear, do not pry." The instruction came too late and too softly. Another lady leaned in. A gentleman behind them chuckled. Lady Penrith stood motionless, her fan half raised, her eyes fixed upon Cecily with exquisite sympathy. Cecily understood then that the room had become a stage without her consent. "Please return it," Cecily said. Her voice was even. That steadiness cost more than anyone present would ever know. The girl in lavender flushed. "I only thought perhaps it was a dance." "It is not." A gentleman took the card lightly from the girl's hand, perhaps meaning to be amusing, perhaps only careless because carelessness had rarely cost him anything. "Come now, we must not leave a mystery unread." Someone said his name in warning. He looked down. His expression shifted, then lifted with the uncertain delight of a man who had found scandal but not yet measured its cruelty. "It says," he began. The room quieted with indecent speed. Cecily did not move. "Too old," he read, and then stopped. The silence widened. He cleared his throat, but pride would not allow him to retreat from the performance he had begun. "Too old to be any man's bride." For a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the whispers came. They did not rise like thunder. They spread like ink in water. Soft. Fast. Impossible to gather back. A fan snapped shut. Someone inhaled. A young woman looked away, embarrassed not by the cruelty, but by having witnessed it too openly. Martin reached for Cecily's elbow. She stepped aside before he could touch her. "That is enough," she said. The gentleman holding the card seemed suddenly aware that the object in his hand was not amusing at all. "Lady Cecily, I didn't mean to." "No," she said. "Most people do not mean to. That is how they excuse almost everything." She crossed the few yards between them. Every step felt measured, not by distance, but by years. 12 seasons. 12 years of smiling at tables where she had not been chosen. 12 years of being told patience was graceful, resignation was dignified, and hope, at her age, was unbecoming. She held out her hand. The gentleman placed the ivory card into her palm. The ribbon had been torn. Across the pale surface, the insult had been written in a hand too elegant to be accidental. The ink was a deep, unusual purple. Not black. Not brown. Purple, vivid enough to look almost ceremonial beneath the candles. Cecily closed her fingers around the card. "Thank you," she said. The words were absurd. Polite training survived even disgrace. Martin was beside her now, speaking through his smile. "We should go. A moment ago you feared people would notice." "Cecily." "They have noticed." She turned slowly, not searching the whole room, only one face. The Duke of Wycliffe had gone still near the card tables. The gentlemen around him had fallen silent. His eyes were no longer cold. They were fixed upon the card in her hand, then upon her face, and in that fixed attention Cecily saw the first true crack in his composure. He knew. Not who had written it. Not yet. But he knew the sentence had begun with him. Lady Penrith moved forward with perfect sorrow. "My dear Lady Cecily," she said, "how dreadful. Some jests are most unkind." Cecily looked at her. "Yes." The single word landed cleanly. Lady Penrith's fan stopped moving. "And some," Cecily continued, "are not jests at all." The room held its breath. The Duke stepped away from the gentleman. One pace. Then another. No one blocked him. Rank made a path before he had even asked for one. Cecily remained where she stood, the torn ribbon loose against her wrist, the ivory card burning in her gloved hand. For the first time that evening, every eye in the assembly room saw her. Not as decoration. Not as failure. As the center of a wound no one could politely pretend did not exist. The Duke of Wycliffe crossed the room toward her. The Duke of Wycliffe stopped before Cecily with the entire assembly room watching him breathe. No one had announced his movement. No one needed to. Rank had made his approach louder than a bell, though his boots made almost no sound upon the polished floor. The gentleman who had read the words aloud stepped back at once, color rising beneath his powdered composure. Lady Penrith lowered her fan by half an inch. Mr. Martin Arden went rigid beside Cecily, his fingers still hovering near her elbow as though he had meant to guide her away and had discovered, too late, that she was no longer his to move. Cecily stood with the ivory card in her gloved hand. Its torn ribbon trailed against her wrist. The purple ink seemed darker now, more deliberate beneath the candlelight. It would have been easier to hide it. She did not. Adrian Lockhart looked first at her face, then at the card, and something in his expression closed like a door against the room. "Lady Cecily," he said. His voice carried without effort. "May I see what was written?" He did not reach for it. That small restraint did what a grand apology could not have done. It gave her a choice. Cecily heard the restless whisper of silk around them. She knew what the room wanted. They wanted tears, outrage, a trembling denial, or some grateful collapse into ducal rescue. They would not have it. "You may," she said. "But I lend it as evidence, Your Grace, not as a relic for your pity." The faintest sound moved through the nearby guests. It might have been shock. It might have been pleasure. Society adored a wound, provided the wounded did not speak too clearly. The Duke accepted the card from her hand. His fingers did not touch hers. He looked down. For a moment he was completely still. Then his gaze lifted, not to Cecily, but to the room. "Who wrote this?" No one answered. The silence changed shape. Before, it had been hungry. Now it was afraid. The young lady in lavender stared at her slippers. Her mother suddenly found interest in the embroidery of her shawl. The gentleman who had read the words cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I found myself in an unfortunate position. I assure you I only read what was placed before me. I did not ask who performed the reading," Adrian said. "I asked who wrote it." The gentleman bowed his head and said nothing more. Lady Penrith moved with the light grace of a woman who had never believed consequence could reach her. "Surely, Your Grace, this is an ugly little jest by some foolish hand. Best not to give it more life than it deserves." Adrian turned his eyes upon her. "Some words have already been given life, Lady Penrith. The question is whose hand chose to display them." A flicker crossed her face. It vanished quickly, but Cecily saw it. So did he. Rosalie Penrith, half hidden behind her mother's shoulder, had gone very pale. Cecily remembered the girl's warning tone, the tremble beneath her politeness, the way her gaze had dropped whenever Lady Penrith's hand tightened. It was possible Rosalie knew more than she wished to know. It was also possible she knew nothing except fear. Adrian examined the card again. His thumb hovered near the letters without smearing the ink. "This hand is practiced," he said. "Not hurried. Not the work of a servant snatching a moment near the refreshment table." Lady Penrith's fan opened with a soft snap. "You give the matter a great deal of dignity, Your Grace." "No," he said. "I give Lady Cecily the dignity others attempted to take from her." The words struck the room with quiet force. Cecily felt them before she allowed herself to judge them. Protection, like insult, could become another spectacle. She would not be made into a banner for his honor merely because he had discovered guilt in time to polish it. "Your Grace," she said, "I do not require the room to be punished into sympathy." He looked at her then. The change in his expression was small, but it reached his eyes. "What do you require?" It was a dangerous question to ask a woman who had spent years requiring so little. Cecily drew in one measured breath. The truth would be a novelty. His mouth tightened, not in displeasure, but in recognition. "Then we shall begin there." He turned again to the gathered guests. "Until the hand responsible chooses honesty, let the room remember this. The sentence used against Lady Cecily began in my mouth, and I will not permit another person to hide behind my error." A murmur rose, quickly smothered. Cecily's fingers closed around the torn end of the ribbon at her wrist. He had not excused himself. He had not denied the origin. That did not heal the wound, but it changed the air around it. Mr. Arden shifted uneasily. "Your Grace, perhaps this matter may be discussed privately. My cousin has been distressed enough." Cecily almost smiled. Martin had ignored her distress until it threatened to attract a duke. Adrian did not look at him. "Lady Cecily may decide what is enough." Those words unsettled her more than the public defense. Not because they were grand, but because they were exact. For 12 years, enough had been decided around her. Enough mourning. Enough patience. Enough hope. Enough visibility. Tonight, in the middle of a room that had just humiliated her, the Duke of Wycliffe returned the decision to her as if it had always belonged there. Lady Penrith's voice softened. How noble. Yet one must be careful, Your Grace. Excess attention may worsen the very discomfort you wish to remedy. Then perhaps the room should learn discomfort, he replied. The musicians, trapped between sets, hovered near their stands as though unsure whether dignity required sound or silence. Adrian glanced toward them, then back to Cecily. Lady Cecily, your card was interrupted. My card was empty enough that interruption required little effort. A few people looked down. The Duke did not. Then allow me to correct what I can. He held out the ivory card. May I have the next dance? It was absurd how quickly the room inhaled. Cecily felt it pass over her skin like a draft. Somewhere behind her, Martin made a small, strangled sound. Lady Penrith's fan froze. Rosalie's eyes widened. The young women who had spent the evening floating from partner to partner looked suddenly as if the floor had tilted beneath them. Cecily stared at the Duke's extended hand. A dance could be many things in London. A courtesy. A flirtation. A declaration. A repair. A trap. Why? She asked quietly. His answer came just as softly, but she knew those nearest would strain to hear. Because I helped place a mark upon you before this room. I will not leave it there. That sounds like reputation, Your Grace. Yours, not mine. Something like pain moved through his controlled face. It was gone almost at once. You are right to suspect it. She had not expected that. I do not know how to admire convenient honesty. Then don't admire it, he said. The contraction made the sentence almost human. Judge it. Cecily looked at him for another moment. He did not smile. He did not plead. He simply stood there with her damaged card in one hand and his other hand offered in full view of every person who had found amusement in her shame. She placed her gloved fingers upon his. The room did not speak. It watched. The musicians began too quickly, then recovered into a measured strain. Adrian led her to the floor with perfect propriety, leaving space enough between them for every rule of decency and not enough for indifference. The first steps passed in silence. Cecily knew she was a competent dancer, not a dazzling one. She had once loved dancing before empty cards taught her to distrust anticipation. Tonight, every turn felt less like movement and more like being returned to the center of a room from which she had been quietly exiled. I owe you an apology, Adrian said. You offered one to the room. No. I offered the room responsibility. My apology is yours. She kept her gaze just past his shoulder. Then make it precise. His hand, properly placed, steadied but did not tighten. I spoke of you as though your value could be measured by age and marital usefulness. I did it because I was angry at Lady Penrith's suggestion, and because I have contempt for the way this room bargains with women. But contempt aimed carelessly does not become principle. It becomes cruelty. Cecily missed one half step. He adjusted at once, so subtly no one beyond them could have noticed. That angered her more than clumsiness would have done. Even his correction had grace. You understand the sentence very well after it has been repeated back to you, she said. Too late. Yes. Do you expect that word to comfort me? No, he paused as they turned beneath the chandeliers. I expect nothing from you. The simplicity of that answer unsettled her. Men often expected forgiveness to follow apology as neatly as a bow followed introduction. You should expect suspicion, she said. I do. And dislike. I deserve some portion of it. Only some. His gaze met hers. I am hoping to earn a more accurate accounting. It was almost wit. Not charm, not flirtation, but a dry intelligence that might have pleased her in another man, on another night, before the purple ink and the silence. She refused to let it please her now. The handwriting, he said, lowering his voice further. Have you seen it before? Not that I know. I have. Cecily looked at him then. Where? On an invitation delivered to my house 3 days ago from Penrith House. Her breath caught, though she did not allow the room to see it. Lady Penrith? Perhaps. Perhaps someone in her household. I will not accuse without proof. How restrained of you. I am learning the cost of speaking too soon. That answer landed between them, heavy and deserved. The dance carried them past Lady Penrith, whose smile had thinned into porcelain. Rosalie stood beside her, hands clasped too tightly around her fan. When Cecily's eyes met the girls', Rosalie looked away with visible misery. Not guilt exactly. Fear. The clue settled in Cecily's mind beside the purple ink. The music neared its close. Adrian guided her through the final turn, then released her with formal precision. Applause for the dance came weakly and unevenly, because no one knew whether to approve, retreat, or pretend nothing remarkable had happened. Cecily took her hand back. For one fleeting instant, the absence of his touch felt colder than it should have. She disliked that most of all. He held out the dance card. May I keep this for tonight? To protect me. To find who used it. Those are not always the same thing. His gaze did not waver. Then I will attempt both, and you may condemn the attempt if I confuse them. Cecily considered him. The room leaned closer without moving. At last she said, You may keep the evidence, Your Grace. You do not hold my forgiveness. A faint breath moved through the assembly. Adrian bowed, deeper than the moment required. I understand. Do you? Not fully, he said. But I intend to. That should not have mattered. Intention was a fragile thing in men who had never been denied much. Yet he placed the card inside his coat as if it were not a trifle, not an embarrassment, but a charge. Then he turned just enough for his voice to reach beyond her. Lady Cecily, I shall call tomorrow. The room heard. Martin heard. Lady Penrith heard. Cecily heard the weight of it settle over every whisper that had risen against her. She lifted her chin. Then I hope, Your Grace, that tomorrow brings more truth than tonight. His eyes held hers for one measured breath. So do I. By 11 o'clock the next morning, Arden House had been polished into an appearance of prosperity it did not possess. The front steps had been scrubbed before breakfast. The drawing-room curtains had been shaken until their faded edges looked almost intentional. A cracked porcelain vase had been turned so the floor faced the wall. Even the silver tea service, which Cecily knew had survived 3 private discussions about whether it ought to be sold, gleamed beneath the pale London light as if no creditor had ever breathed upon the family name. Mr. Martin Arden had ordered all of it with the urgency of a general preparing a battlefield, because a duke had sent his card at 10:30, and every servant in the house understood at once that dignity had become an emergency. Cecily stood near the drawing-room window and watched a carriage stop below. She had slept very little. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the purple ink on ivory, the sudden stillness of the assembly room, and the Duke of Wycliffe's hand extended before all those watching faces. She had not dreamed of the dance. That would have been dangerous. She had dreamed instead of the moment before it, when the card was returned to her with the room's cruelty written upon it, and she had felt something inside her move from pain into clarity. Pain could be endured. Clarity demanded something. Stand away from the window, Martin said behind her. It looks eager. Cecily did not turn. Then perhaps the curtains should receive him. They have no reputation to compromise. For heaven's sake, Cecily. You invoke heaven often when speaking to me. It must be fatiguing for both of you. Her aunt, Lady Elspeth Vale, gave the smallest cough from the sofa. It was not quite laughter, but it possessed sympathy enough to warm Cecily's chest. Aunt Elspeth had arrived within an hour of hearing the first distorted version of the Assembly scandal, which meant someone had carried the story across Mayfair before midnight. She was a widow of 55, sharp-eyed, straight-backed, and too independent to be popular with people who preferred women softened by dependence. Cecily had always loved her for that. Martin, Lady Elspeth said, smoothing one black-gloved hand over her skirt, if His Grace has come to call upon my niece, she may stand where she chooses in her own drawing-room. Martin's smile tightened. Arden House is still under my management. Then try managing your face. It has been shouting since breakfast. Cecily looked down to hide the brief curve of her mouth. The butler entered before Martin could answer. His Grace, the Duke of Wycliffe. Adrian Lockhart crossed the threshold with no visible surprise at the house's careful economies. That, Cecily noticed at once. His gaze moved over the room, not rudely, but accurately. The altered curtains. The old carpet. The tea service too polished for comfort. The chairs arranged to make the room seem fuller. He saw everything. Yet when he bowed, his attention settled on Cecily as though the house existed only to hold the space between them. "Lady Cecily. Your Grace." She curtsied. "You are punctual." I was uncertain whether punctuality would count in my favor, but I had few other virtues available on such short notice. It was dry enough to be almost amusing. She did not allow herself to be amused. "Lady Elspeth," he said, bowing to her aunt. "Mr. Arden." Martin bowed with elaborate respect. "Your Grace, our family is honored beyond measure." "That remains to be seen," Adrian said. The sentence was polite, but it ended Martin's performance for a breath. Cecily watched the Duke remove his gloves with measured care. His face was composed, but there was something taut beneath it. He had not come merely to display remorse. He had come prepared to act, which could be more dangerous. Tea was offered. No one wanted it. Aunt Elspeth poured anyway, because propriety, like armor, was most useful when everyone knew it was there. Adrian accepted a cup and placed it untouched on the small table beside him. "Lady Cecily, I owe you an explanation before anything else." Martin leaned forward. "Perhaps it is best to consider how the matter appeared publicly. A swift correction could preserve all parties from further speculation." "I did not come to preserve all parties," Adrian said. "I came to speak to Lady Cecily." Martin flushed. Aunt Elspeth lifted her teacup and looked pleased with the world for the first time that morning. Cecily folded her hands in her lap. "Then speak, Your Grace." Adrian did not sit back like a man settling into negotiation. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting upon his knees, every line of him controlled and direct. "Last night, Lady Penrith placed your name before me as if you were a convenient answer to an inconvenience. I answered with contempt. I told myself that contempt was meant for the practice, not for you. That distinction may satisfy a man alone in his study. It cannot repair what it did in a room full of witnesses." Cecily kept still. Martin looked confused by an apology that did not attempt escape. Aunt Elspeth watched Adrian with narrowed approval. "You admit the words were yours," Cecily said. "Yes. And the words on the card?" "Not in my hand." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, not the dance card. "I compared the writing to an invitation sent from Penrith House 3 days ago. The resemblance is close enough to concern me, not enough to accuse openly. The ink is unusual. Purple, with a blue undertone. Expensive. I have sent both to a trusted clerk who handles my correspondence and knows stationers' accounts better than most gentlemen know their own ledgers." Martin shifted. "That sounds rather serious for a foolish prank." Adrian's eyes moved to him. Public cruelty is often called foolish by those who were not its target. Silence followed. Cecily felt the sentence settle in the room. Not upon her this time. Around her. Like a wall raised at her back. "You are investigating Lady Penrith," she said. "I am investigating the hand that used my words. That is not the same as defending me." "No," he said. "It is where I must begin." There it was again. Precision. Cecily distrusted charm, but precision was more difficult to dismiss. It did not ask to be liked. It asked to be weighed. Martin cleared his throat. "Your Grace, while the family is grateful for your concern, Lady Cecily's prospects must now be considered practically. A woman's reputation is a delicate matter. Last night's attention, unfortunate as it was, may be shaped into something advantageous if we are wise." Cecily turned her head slowly. "Advantageous? Do not look at me in that fashion. I am speaking as your cousin and protector." Aunt Elspeth set down her cup. Protector is a generous word for a man who discovered concern only after a duke crossed a ballroom. Martin's jaw hardened. "Lady Elspeth, this house cannot be governed by sentiment." "No. It appears to have been governed by debt." The word landed with a sharpness no raised voice could have improved. Cecily saw Adrian register it. Not greedily. Not with the vulgar curiosity of gossip. He noticed it the way he noticed the curtains, the silver, the wear at the carpet's edge. As evidence. Martin stood. I do not think this is appropriate conversation before His Grace. Then sit down, Aunt Elspeth said. Standing makes you no wiser. Adrian rose as well, not to overpower, but because rank altered the room whenever he chose to use it. Mr. Arden, I will not discuss Lady Cecily as though she is a settlement clause. Martin went pale with anger and calculation. Of course not, Your Grace. Adrian turned back to Cecily. But I did come with a proposal. The room became very quiet. Even Aunt Elspeth's hand stilled around her teacup. Cecily heard the carriage wheels outside, distant on the street. She heard the small tick from the mantel clock. She heard, impossibly, the echo of whispers from the night before. Adrian did not move closer. He did not lower himself into melodrama. He stood before her with the grave restraint of a man offering not romance, but consequence. If you will permit it, I will ask for your hand in marriage. Martin made a sound too soft to be a word. Aunt Elspeth looked at Cecily, not at the Duke. That was why Cecily loved her. She understood that the proposal belonged first to the woman receiving it, not to the room witnessing it. Cecily looked up at Adrian. Because you insulted me. Because I injured you publicly. That is a cleaner sentence. It is not a kinder reason. It is an honest one. Honesty can still be insufficient. His face changed, but only slightly. A flicker of something like respect moved through the sternness. Yes. Martin stepped forward. Cecily, I must urge you to consider what is being offered. His Grace honors this family beyond expectation. No, Cecily said, without looking away from Adrian. He offers to repair damage done to me. That is not the same as honoring the family. Adrian's gaze deepened. Martin went silent, perhaps because he could not decide whether agreeing would profit him more than objecting. Cecily rose. The movement steadied her. Sitting made her feel like a woman being assessed. Standing reminded her that she still possessed a spine, a voice, and the right to use both. Your Grace, last night an entire room saw me made ridiculous. You altered that before I had time to ask whether I wanted alteration. Today you come with a proposal that would silence every whisper by turning me into a duchess. It would protect you. Would it? She asked. Or would it protect the version of you that cannot bear having caused harm? He absorbed the question. She saw it strike. He did not deflect it. That made it harder to dislike him, and therefore more necessary to remain careful. Perhaps both, he said. I will not pretend myself free of pride. Then I will not pretend myself grateful for being offered a crown to cover a bruise. Aunt Elspeth's eyes sharpened with feeling, though her face remained composed. Martin looked horrified. Adrian looked at Cecily as though the words had revealed not defiance, but a map. What would you require? He asked. From the proposal? From me. She looked toward the window, where morning light lay thinly across the carpet. London had not changed overnight. Somewhere in Mayfair, women were already retelling the assembly as entertainment over chocolate. Somewhere, Lady Penrith was smiling over correspondence. Somewhere, the ivory dance card sat in the keeping of the man who had helped wound her and now wished to become her shield. Cecily turned back. I require you to understand that I am not a problem created by your sentence and solved by your title. I am not the Duke's apology wearing a veil. The mantel clock ticked once. Then again. Adrian bowed his head, not deeply, but enough that the gesture felt private despite the witnesses. That is just. It is not an answer. No, he said. It is a boundary. I heard it. The words moved through her more gently than she wanted. Martin recovered enough to protest. Cecily, you cannot mean to refuse outright. I mean to refuse haste. At your age, haste is hardly the danger. The room froze. Adrian turned. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Mr. Arden. Martin stopped breathing. You will not speak to Lady Cecily in that manner in my presence. Cecily should have felt satisfaction. Instead she felt tired, because the rebuke had come only after years in which Martin had spoken to her in exactly that manner without consequence. Still, Adrian had said it. That mattered, though she was not yet ready to decide how much. "I will consider nothing today," she said. "Not marriage. Not forgiveness. Not strategy. If you wish to call again, Your Grace, you may do so when you have more truth about the card and less urgency about saving me." Adrian took that as if it were not a dismissal but an instruction. "Then I will bring truth." He reached into his coat again and placed the folded Penrith invitation on the table, weighted beneath his untouched teacup. "For your aunt's keeping, if you allow it. Not mine alone." Cecily glanced at Aunt Elspeth, who gave a small nod. "Allowed." Adrian bowed to them both. At the door, he paused. "Lady Cecily." She met his eyes. "Yes, Your Grace. I asked today because I believed it was the honorable thing." His voice lowered, not enough to hide, but enough to make the words hers first. "I hope to become wiser before I ask again." Then he was gone, leaving behind cold tea, a room full of unsettled air, and a piece of Penrith paper that looked harmless until one remembered how elegantly cruelty could write. Martin waited only until the front door closed below. "You foolish woman," he breathed. Cecily turned from the window. "No, Martin. Merely an inconvenient one." He stared at her, and for the first time in many years, Cecily saw not annoyance in his face, but fear. By the following afternoon, Mayfair had accomplished what it did best. It had taken a wound, wrapped it in lace, passed it from carriage to drawing room, and called the result conversation. Cecily learned this not because anyone told her directly, but because 3 calling cards arrived before luncheon from women who had ignored Arden House for years, and because Mr. Martin Arden spent the morning pacing with the restless energy of a man who could not decide whether scandal had ruined him or presented an opportunity. Aunt Elspeth, who had remained at Arden House with the calm determination of a general occupying a fort, read the cards one by one and dropped them onto the tea tray. "Curiosity," she said. "Curiosity. False sympathy. That last one has better handwriting but worse morals." Cecily looked up from the small pile of household accounts she had been pretending to examine. "You can tell from a calling card?" "My dear, at my age one can tell from the pressure of the ink." Martin entered before Cecily could answer, carrying a note sealed with dark blue wax. He did not hand it to Cecily at once. He held it as though proximity to ducal correspondence improved his breeding. "From Wycliffe House," he said. Aunt Elspeth extended her hand. "Then give it to the lady to whom it is addressed before your fingers begin composing a reply." His expression tightened, but he obeyed. Cecily broke the seal. The Duke's hand was spare and disciplined, with no flourishes except a slight pressure on the final stroke of her name. He requested permission to pay her public attentions for 1 week, beginning with a carriage drive in Hyde Park that afternoon, if Lady Cecily and her aunt found the proposal acceptable. He added that no announcement, implication, or claim would be made without her consent. The last sentence was written more darkly than the rest. Cecily read it twice. "Well," Martin demanded. "His Grace asks whether I will drive in the park with him under Aunt Elspeth's supervision." "Excellent. You will accept." Cecily folded the letter. "I did not realize my answer had already dressed for the occasion." "Do not be difficult. A public drive with a duke will answer half the whispers by sunset." "And the other half?" Aunt Elspeth asked. "Will breed before breakfast, like mice." Martin ignored her. "Cecily, you have been offered a rare chance to restore your position." Cecily looked at him steadily. "My position was not misplaced in the park." "You know what I mean." "Yes. That has rarely improved the experience." Aunt Elspeth rose and crossed to Cecily's chair. "Do you wish to go?" It was such a simple question. No one in the room except her aunt seemed to understand how unusual that made it. Cecily held the folded note in both hands. She thought of the Duke standing in the assembly room, admitting his words had been used as a blade. She thought of his proposal, offered too soon and withdrawn only because she had forced him to see the difference between remedy and respect. She thought, too, of Lady Penrith's smile and Rosalie's frightened eyes. The matter was not over. To hide now would allow others to finish writing it. Yes, Cecily said at last. But not as his answer to scandal. Martin exhaled in relief too quickly. As what, then? As myself. Hyde Park at 5 o'clock was less a park than a theatre with trees. Carriages moved in graceful procession beneath the mild spring sky, wheels turning over the swept drive, horses stepping high as if they too understood that they were being judged. Ladies leaned beneath parasols. Gentlemen bowed from saddles. Mothers measured one another's daughters through narrowed eyes. Every foot of green seemed arranged for observation. Cecily sat beside Aunt Elspeth in the Duke of Wycliffe's open carriage, aware of the footman behind them, the groom ahead, the neat perfection of the matched bays, and the careful distance between herself and the man who had altered the direction of her week with one sentence and then, perhaps, with one dance. Adrian sat opposite her, hat in hand, his posture correct enough to satisfy the strictest chaperone. He had not tried to manufacture intimacy. That, she admitted privately, was wise. Lady Cecily, he said as the carriage joined the slow turn of fashionable traffic, I am grateful you agreed. Gratitude is safer than triumph, Your Grace. I had not planned to feel triumph. Men often neglect to plan their confidence. It arrives without invitation. Aunt Elspeth made a sound that might have been the clearing of her throat. The Duke's mouth almost changed. Then I will attempt to keep the door barred. A week of public attentions, Cecily said. No announcement. No implication that I have consented to anything beyond being seen beside you in daylight. Agreed. No heroic gestures intended to shame people into approving me. That may prove difficult. I have been accused of looking severe even in repose. Severity is not heroism. No. It is often merely bad manners with better tailoring. This time Aunt Elspeth did laugh. Cecily looked away quickly, annoyed to discover that amusement could still find her. The first carriage they passed contained two ladies who bowed to the Duke, then stared at Cecily with the startled politeness usually reserved for unexpected weather. The next held a mother and daughter who whispered behind a fan without sufficient skill. By the third turn, Cecily understood the shape of the afternoon. No one ignored her now. They looked, calculated, softened their mouths into pity, then sharpened them with speculation. The attention she had once imagined might feel like vindication had its own cruelty. Invisibility had been lonely. Visibility was exhausting. They call this charity already, Aunt Elspeth said mildly, nodding toward a barouche where two matrons had bent together like conspirators over prayer books. Adrian's jaw tightened. Cecily saw the effort it took him not to turn the carriage or cut the women with a sentence. Let them, she said. He looked at her. You should not have to endure it. I have endured worse than being underestimated by women whose greatest accomplishment is arranging other people's futures. That does not make it acceptable. No. But if you correct every whisper, the afternoon becomes about your temper. I would prefer it remain about their lack of imagination. His gaze held hers for a moment. Then he inclined his head. As you wish. The words were plain. Yet something in Cecily eased, not because he had obeyed, but because he had not made obedience look noble. A short distance ahead, a small commotion broke the measured elegance of the drive. A young lady standing beside a curricle had dropped her fan, and the wind had carried it beneath the wheel of a waiting carriage. Her companion, perhaps an older sister, scolded her in a fierce whisper while two young gentlemen laughed from horseback. The girl's cheeks burned. She looked no more than 17. Her first season, Cecily guessed. Perhaps her first public mistake. Stop the carriage, please, Cecily said. Adrian signaled at once. Is something wrong? Only something familiar. Before Martin or society could have reminded her of propriety, Cecily was already accepting the footman's assistance down, with Aunt Elspeth watching in sharp approval. She crossed the few steps to the girl, whose eyes widened with embarrassment at being approached by the woman everyone was already discussing. Miss, Cecily said gently, I believe the wind has chosen drama over manners. It does that in the park. The girl gave a shaky laugh despite herself. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make a scene. Scenes are rarely improved by intention. Cecily glanced at the nearest footman, who retrieved the fan before the carriage wheel could crush it. The young gentleman on horseback had gone quiet. Cecily accepted the fan, inspected the bent rib, and opened it carefully. There. Only slightly injured. It will recover if no one insists on telling the story too often. The girl's companion looked chastened. Lady Cecily, you are very kind. The name moved through the small cluster. Recognition followed. Cecily felt it, the quick reassessment, the surprise that a woman publicly pitied might still have grace to spare. She handed the fan back. Next time, hold it with 2 fingers and less fear. Fear drops more things than carelessness does. The girl smiled, small and grateful. Thank you. When Cecily returned to the carriage, Adrian stood waiting beside the step. He had not rushed forward. He had not taken the moment from her. He merely offered his hand when it was useful. She placed her gloved fingers on his palm and climbed back into the carriage. Only when they were seated again did he speak. You saw her before anyone else understood she needed saving from embarrassment. Embarrassment is not death, Your Grace. But society sometimes practices on small wounds before making larger ones. His expression darkened. You speak as an expert. Most women do. The carriage moved on. This time, when people looked, some did so with less certainty. The shift was small, but Cecily felt it. Adrian did too. He watched her not as a problem, not as a duty, but with an attention that seemed to gather details and keep them. That was more dangerous than admiration. Admiration often saw only what flattered the admirer. Attention saw what a person tried to hide. Near the end of the drive, a Penrith carriage appeared beneath the trees. Lady Penrith sat upright within it, dressed in lavender silk, her face arranged into gracious surprise. Rosalie sat beside her, pale and silent. When their carriages drew level, Lady Penrith bowed her head. Your Grace. Lady Cecily. How very touching to see such devoted concern. The word touching was placed like a pin beneath lace. Cecily smiled. Lady Penrith, how comforting to see concern recognized by one so practiced in performance. Aunt Elspeth looked toward the trees with heroic restraint. Adrian said nothing. He had promised. Rosalie's eyes flickered to Cecily, full of something urgent and trapped, before Lady Penrith's gloved hand settled over her daughter's wrist. The gesture was light. Rosalie went still. Cecily saw Adrian see it. A silence passed between them after the Penrith carriage rolled on. Not romantic. Not yet. Something more useful. A shared noticing. Miss Penrith is afraid of her mother, Cecily said. Yes, Adrian replied. And Lady Penrith is afraid of losing control. Cecily looked at him. Of her daughter? Of the story? The answer chilled her because it was true. When they returned to Arden House, the footman assisted Aunt Elspeth first. Adrian then offered Cecily his hand. Lady Cecily, he said quietly, I will continue only while you permit it. She looked at his hand, then at his face. Then you may call tomorrow. His eyes changed. Not with victory. With relief carefully governed. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Your Grace. I am not an easy woman to persuade. No, he said, and for the first time there was warmth beneath the restraint. I am beginning to consider that your finest quality. Cecily withdrew her hand before the warmth could reach too far. Behind them, Mayfair had already begun deciding what the drive meant. For once, Cecily did not intend to let it decide alone. The gossip sheet arrived before the flowers did. Cecily found it folded beside the breakfast tray the next morning, its cheap paper pretending to be respectable by the severity of its type. Someone had circled one sentence in pencil. Has Wycliffe chosen pity over prudence? For a moment, she only looked at the words. They were not as cruel as purple ink on ivory, yet they possessed a different kind of insult. Pity was a softer cage than mockery, but it remained a cage. Aunt Elspeth plucked the sheet from the tray, read the line, and made a sound of deep contempt. Ink is wasted on cowards. Cecily spread marmalade over toast she did not want. Cowards are often the most faithful customers of ink. You are not obliged to appear anywhere today. No. That is why I shall. Her aunt studied her. Where? Cecily glanced toward the small stack of letters near her plate. Lady Montford's Charity Musicale. The subscription accounts have been disorderly for weeks, and if I fail to appear, Mrs. Vale will declare herself abandoned and put the orphanage ledger into the hands of Sir Percival's wife, who believes subtraction is a mood. Aunt Elspeth's mouth softened. You have helped with those accounts for years. Someone had to. The sentence was simple. It carried no complaint, which was precisely why it hurt. By 3 o'clock, Lady Montford's music room had filled with the muffled rustle of respectable benevolence. There were chairs arranged in rows, a pianoforte polished to a shine, and a table near the window where donations were recorded in a ledger with marbled covers. Cecily took her place there as she always did, with her gloves removed, her pen steady, and her face composed enough to discourage questions. Women came to charity events to be seen giving money, which was not the same thing as generosity. Cecily knew the difference. A true gift was quiet after it left the hand. She had just corrected a mistaken entry when a familiar stillness entered the room. She did not need to look up to know who had arrived. People lowered their voices for a duke as naturally as they raised them for scandal. Lady Cecily, Adrian said. She lifted her gaze. He stood on the far side of the subscription table, darkly dressed, perfectly proper, and far too noticeable for a room that had been pretending not to notice her. Your Grace. Aunt Elspeth, seated a few feet away with her embroidery untouched in her lap, gave him a look that offered neither welcome nor refusal. It was the social equivalent of a guarded gate. I did not know you supported Lady Montford's charities, Cecily said. I have done so badly. That is not usually a confession made at a donation table. I sent money and assumed it became virtue. He looked at the ledger beneath her hand. I am beginning to suspect virtue requires more attention than a bank draft. The words were quiet enough not to become performance. Cecily disliked how often he now said things that were difficult to dismiss. Attention is unfashionable, she said. It rarely flatters the person giving it. His gaze rested on the columns of names, sums, corrections, and notes written in her hand. This is your work. It is the committee's work. That was not my question. She dipped the pen, though the entry before her was already complete. I keep the accounts legible. Lady Montford inspires generosity and forgets where she places it. He looked toward the far end of the room, where Lady Montford was greeting guests with warm confusion. How long have you done this? Long enough to know which gentlemen promise £50 after 2 glasses of wine and remember £5 in the morning. His mouth nearly moved. You have a ledger for human nature. London is a ledger for human nature. Mine is merely more honest. A soprano began to sing near the pianoforte, and the room arranged its face into pious enjoyment. Cecily bent over the account book again, hoping the music would provide distance. Adrian did not leave. Instead, he removed an envelope from his coat and placed it on the table, but not near enough to touch her papers. My clerk found the stationer who supplied Lady Penrith's invitations. The purple ink is not common. It was ordered through a private account, though not yet enough to prove the hand. Cecily's pen paused. You bring this here? I bring it where your aunt is present and where half the room is too busy pretending to enjoy Italian to listen closely. Aunt Elspeth did not look up from her embroidery. I am listening closely. I had hoped so, Lady Elspeth. Cecily took the envelope but did not open it. You are thorough. Not enough. Do you expect praise for discovering that after the harm is done? Know that answer again. No defense. No attempt to soften the edge of her question. It was becoming most inconvenient. Before she could reply, Mrs. Vale, a nervous widow who oversaw the orphanage linen fund, hurried toward them with a smaller ledger clutched to her breast. Lady Cecily, forgive me, but the baker has sent his account twice, and the second total is higher than the first, and I cannot make it agree with the subscription from Lord Annerley. Cecily held out her hand. Let me see. Mrs. Vale glanced at Adrian and flushed. Oh, Your Grace. I did not mean to intrude. You have not, Adrian said. I am the one standing in the way of arithmetic. Mrs. Vale looked startled, then relieved. Cecily took the smaller ledger, compared 3 entries, and found the error within moments. The baker added delivery twice. Pay the lower account and send the higher one back with my note. Do not apologize. An apology makes men think their mistake was generous of you to notice. Mrs. Vale's eyes warmed. You always know what to do. Only after making the error privately first. The widow smiled and left. Adrian watched her go, then looked back at Cecily. How many people rely on you in that fashion? That is a strange question. It is a precise one. She closed the smaller ledger. People rely on whoever is willing to be useful. It is not a romance. No, he said. It is labor. The word struck closer than flattery would have. Cecily put down the pen. Do not make too much of it. Why not? Because people have made too little of it for so long that too much would feel like another inaccuracy. His eyes changed. Lady Elspeth told me your mother was ill for several years. Cecily turned toward her aunt. Lady Elspeth's needle did not move. He asked why you vanished from 3 seasons in succession. I answered the question. I did not betray a secret. It was not yours to tell. No, Adrian said. It was mine to ask with more care. Cecily rose from the table, taking the Penrith envelope with her. If your grace will excuse me, the music room is suddenly too warm. Aunt Elspeth began to stand. Cecily touched her shoulder. Only to the side room. I am not fleeing. The small adjoining room held instrument cases, spare chairs, and a tall window looking over the narrow garden behind Lady Montford's house. Cecily entered first. Adrian followed only after Aunt Elspeth gave one sharp nod from the open doorway, remaining near enough to preserve every rule that mattered. Cecily faced the window. You are investigating me as well as the card. I asked about you, he said. That is not the same thing. It feels similar from this side. Then I am sorry. You apologize often for a man known as cold. Cold men leave many small injuries behind them. It gives them practice. She almost turned. She did not. Outside, a gardener carried a tray of young plants across the path, moving carefully so the soil would not spill. It seemed absurdly peaceful. My mother began declining when I was 23, Cecily said. Not dramatically. That would have been easier for society to understand. She was simply less able each month. Less able to attend, less able to remember, less able to bear noise. My father was already ill with worry over debts he would not name. So I stayed home. 1 season became 2. Then 3. By the time I returned, I had become a story people finished without consulting me. Adrian said nothing. The silence helped. They said I had been overlooked. Then they said I was particular. Then they said I had lost my bloom. No one said I had been measuring laudanum drops at midnight, dismissing creditors with tea at noon, and learning which jewels could be sold without my mother asking where they had gone. Her voice remained level. She was proud of that. Mr. Arden knew? Adrian asked. Martin knew enough. He preferred the version in which I was unfortunate. It made his management seem charitable. And I believed the finished story. She turned then. You did not merely believe it. You repeated its cruelest conclusion. His face tightened as if she had placed the card into his hand again. Yes. The music from the next room swelled, then softened. Cecily realized that anger had not left her. It had simply made room for grief. I am tired, Your Grace, of being treated as if my years are empty because no man placed a ring upon them. Adrian took that in. When he spoke, his voice was lower. I spoke of age when I should have asked what those years had cost you. The sentence entered the room quietly, but it did not leave. Cecily looked away first, not because she was defeated, but because she did not wish him to see how close the words came to healing something she had not meant to expose. Do not become eloquent, she said. It makes distrust more difficult. I will attempt to remain awkward. Despite herself, a breath that was almost laughter escaped her. It startled them both. From the doorway, Aunt Elspeth looked profoundly satisfied and pretended to examine her thread. Cecily held up the envelope he had brought. The ink matters. Yes. And the paper. I will know more soon. Then bring facts next time, not my history. I cannot promise never to ask who you are. His gaze held hers. "But I can promise not to confuse inquiry with entitlement." That was too finely said. Too near the thing she needed and feared. Cecily walked back to the ledger before she could answer unwisely. Neither of them saw the young maid slip from the corridor near the side room, nor how quickly she crossed the servants' passage toward the street. By sunset, the message had reached Penrith House. Lady Penrith read it beside her writing desk, where a bottle of purple ink stood with its stopper tight and clean. Then she folded the note, touched one finger to the polished wood, and smiled without warmth. "So," she murmured. "His Grace has begun asking the wrong questions." The King's Theatre had never looked more like a place of judgment than it did that evening, though every gilded surface insisted it was built for pleasure. Candlelight floated in tiers above the boxes. Jewels flashed against silk. Fans opened and closed like small, secret doors. Music rose from the orchestra pit with a sweetness too polished to be trusted. Cecily sat beside Aunt Elspeth in Lady Montford's box, her hands folded over her lap, aware that the entire house had learned to watch without appearing to watch. 3 days had passed since the assembly. 2 since the charity musicale. 1 since a second gossip sheet had praised the Duke of Wycliffe's noble compassion with such oily emphasis that Aunt Elspeth had used it to light the morning fire. Cecily had come tonight because retreat would have allowed other people to decide the meaning of her absence. She wore blue silk, not new but beautifully remade, with pearl drops that had belonged to her mother and a shawl fine enough to disguise its age. She had chosen every piece with care. Not to tempt admiration. To refuse defeat. "Half the women here have looked at you already," Aunt Elspeth murmured behind her fan. "The other half are waiting until the curtain rises so they may pretend it was accidental. Then I shall endeavor to give them a profile worth their effort. That is the spirit. Vanity is sometimes only courage with better lighting." Cecily almost smiled. Across the theatre, in a box 2 tiers above, Lady Penrith sat with Rosalie at her side. The older woman was dressed in silver grey, serene as frost. Rosalie looked pale beneath the candles. When her eyes found Cecily, they widened with a warning so quick it might have been imagined. Then Lady Penrith leaned toward her daughter, and Rosalie lowered her gaze at once. Cecily felt the first thread of unease tighten. A movement below drew whispers from the pit and boxes. The Duke of Wycliffe had entered. He did not look toward Lady Penrith first. He looked for Cecily, found her in Lady Montford's box, and bowed. The gesture was formal, not intimate, but the theatre noticed it as if he had spoken her name from the stage. Cecily inclined her head. It was no more than courtesy. Her pulse seemed not to understand. During the first act, she forced herself to attend to the music. The soprano sang of betrayal in Italian, which made the ladies around her sigh as if treachery were charming when accompanied by a harp. Cecily might have been amused if the unease had not grown with each passing minute. It began as a whisper passed from one box to another. Then a folded paper appeared in Lady Bexam's hand. Another reached Sir Edmund's wife. A third was carried by a young man too pleased with himself to be discreet. By the end of the aria, several people had stopped watching the stage. They were reading. Then they were looking at Cecily. Aunt Elspeth noticed at the same moment. "What is moving through the boxes?" Cecily kept her face still. Not admiration for the tenor. A paper was brought to Lady Montford by a flustered acquaintance who pretended she wished to prevent embarrassment while delivering it directly to the source. "My dear Lady Montford," she whispered, too loudly, "I thought you should know this is being circulated. Most distressing. Most improper." Lady Montford unfolded it. Her kind face altered. Aunt Elspeth held out her hand. "Give it to me before your distress becomes contagious." Lady Montford obeyed. Aunt Elspeth read, and the colour in her face changed not to pallor, but to anger. Cecily took the paper from her. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, and false. "My dear Duke," it read, "I cannot bear the ruin that awaits my family. If your Grace would only make good the kindness you began, I could be saved from disgrace, and you would find me grateful beyond pride." There was more. Enough to suggest desperation. Enough to make her look like a woman who had begged for marriage while pretending dignity. Enough to twist every public attention into a scheme. At the bottom, her name had been imitated with insulting care. Lady Cecily Arden. The theatre seemed to tilt. Cecily stared at the paper until the letters steadied. Purple ink. Fine paper. A faint crest pressed almost invisibly near the edge. Penrith. Aunt Elspeth said, very softly, do not crumple it. Evidence prefers to remain flat. Cecily looked up. Across the theatre, Lady Penrith was watching with an expression of sorrow so graceful it should have been framed. The first act ended. Applause rose unevenly. Then the whispers grew bold enough to have shape. Begged him. Debt, they say. Poor Wycliffe. At her age, one becomes practical. But to trap a duke. The last phrase reached Cecily clearly. Trap a duke. She looked down at the forged letter again. The old wound had been improved upon. Too old had made her pitiable. This made her dangerous. Aunt Elspeth reached for her arm. We can leave. No, Cecily. If I leave now, they will say guilt drove me out before the second act. They will say something regardless. Then let them work harder. A shadow fell across the doorway of the box. Adrian stood there, hat in hand, his face so controlled that only someone watching carefully would have seen the fury beneath it. Cecily saw. So did her aunt. Lady Montford, he said with a bow. Lady Elspeth. Lady Cecily. Lady Montford, overwhelmed by rank and scandal, nearly dropped her fan. Aunt Elspeth did not move. Your Grace, if you have come to ask whether my niece wrote this letter, choose your next words with unusual care. I did not come to ask that. His gaze moved to Cecily. May I see it? She handed him the paper. His eyes dropped. One line. Then another. His expression did not change, which made the anger more frightening. This is not yours. No, the paper is Penrith stock. So I observed. The ink is the same. So I observed. Something in his gaze sharpened at her calm. You should not have had to observe any of this in a theatre. There are many things I should not have had to learn in public, Your Grace. He took the rebuke without defence. Then Lord Ellingham appeared behind him, drawn by the scent of spectacle. Wycliffe, dreadful business. Best contain it at once. If Lady Cecily has been imprudent, perhaps a quiet withdrawal would spare the lady further embarrassment. Adrian turned. If you value quiet, Lord Ellingham, create some. The man retreated half a step. But others were listening now. Guests had gathered in the corridor between boxes. Lady Penrith herself approached with Rosalie at her side, moving slowly enough to appear reluctant. Your Grace, Lady Penrith said, how very painful. I had hoped the matter would not reach you in so public a fashion. Had you? Adrian asked. Her smile trembled with practiced sadness. The world can be unkind to women whose hopes outrun discretion. One feels compassion, naturally. Cecily rose. She had not meant to. Her body chose before caution could stop it. Do not trouble yourself, Lady Penrith. Your compassion always arrives wearing gloves. A murmur passed through the corridor. Rosalie's eyes filled with alarm. Lady Penrith's gaze hardened for less than a heartbeat. Then she turned to Adrian. Surely you see what has happened. A lady in an unfortunate situation may persuade herself that attention is promise. It is sad, but not rare. Aunt Elspeth stood as well. Lady Penrith, take care. You are nearing slander with admirable speed. Adrian looked at Cecily. You asked me not to act without your consent. Her breath caught. In the noise around them, that private boundary returned like a thread between two cliffs. Yes. His jaw tightened. Someone behind Lady Penrith whispered, will he deny her? Another voice answered, he must. Adrian heard it. Cecily knew he heard it, because his eyes changed from controlled anger to something sharper. Protective. Dangerous. Too swift. Then forgive me, he said quietly. Her heart went cold. He stepped out of the box and into the corridor where half the theatre could hear him. Let it be understood, he said, his voice carrying with the ease of command, that Lady Cecily Arden is under my protection. Any insult to her honour will answer to me. And if London requires a clearer answer, it shall have one. I consider Lady Cecily the future Duchess of Wycliffe. Silence fell so quickly that the theatre music seemed to come from another world. Lady Penrith's face went white beneath its careful powder. Lord Ellingham stared. Lady Montfort gasped into her handkerchief. Rosalie looked not relieved, but stricken. Aunt Elspeth closed her eyes for 1 second, as if pained by the exact nobility of the mistake. Cecily stood very still. The words moved through the corridor, into the boxes, down the tiers, across the theatre. Future Duchess of Wycliffe. A shield. A claim. A rescue made without permission. Adrian turned back to her, and in his face she saw the instant he understood. Too late. Again. She took the forged letter from his hand. Then, from inside her reticule, she withdrew the repaired ivory dance card he had returned to her that morning through Aunt Elspeth, its ribbon newly tied but its blank line still untouched. She placed it against his palm. You have made me visible, she said softly. You have not yet made me free. He did not close his fingers around it. Lady Cecily. No, the word was quiet. It stopped him more effectively than anger. She turned to Aunt Elspeth. I would like to leave before the second act. Of course. Adrian stepped aside at once, but the corridor had already become a channel of watching faces. Cecily walked through it with her head high, the forged letter folded in her hand, every whisper striking and falling away. This time, she did not leave because shame drove her. She left because her own dignity had asked to be obeyed. Behind her, the Duke of Wycliffe remained in the corridor with the dance card in his hand and the full weight of what his protection had cost. Cecily did not go home to be managed. That was the first decision she made after the opera, and the first one that felt entirely hers. By the time Aunt Elspeth's carriage rolled away from the theatre, London had already begun reshaping the evening into something easier to repeat. In one version, Cecily had trapped a duke and fled when discovered. In another, the duke had nobly claimed a desperate woman no one else would take. Both versions gave everyone a role except Cecily herself. She sat beside her aunt with the forged letter folded in her reticule and the sound of Adrian's public declaration still burning in her ears. Future Duchess of Wycliffe. It should have been triumph. It had felt like a door closing. Aunt Elspeth did not speak until the carriage had turned onto a quieter street. Arden House, she asked. Cecily looked out at the darkened windows passing by, each one concealing some family, some secret, some private bargain between appearance and truth. No, her aunt's gloved hand stilled on the edge of her cloak. Good. That single word steadied Cecily more than sympathy would have done. By the time they reached Lady Elspeth's smaller house near Grosvenor Square, the lamps had been lit, the servants roused without fuss, and a room prepared as though Cecily had always belonged there. It was not a grand house. Its carpets were worn honestly rather than arranged to deceive. Its furniture had the comfortable confidence of things chosen by a woman who no longer asked anyone's permission. Cecily stood in the guest chamber while her maid, Alice, unpacked the small valise sent from Arden House under Aunt Elspeth's command. The blue silk gown from the opera lay over a chair like a witness too tired to speak. There is a message from Mr. Arden below, my lady, Alice said carefully. He has called twice since dawn. Then he is improving his exercise. Alice lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Shall I say you are not receiving? Say Lady Elspeth is not receiving him, and I am learning from her example. The first confrontation came before luncheon anyway. Martin Arden was a man who could ignore delicacy when anxiety made it inconvenient. He arrived with his hat in hand and anger in his face, only to be kept standing in Lady Elspeth's front parlour for 7 minutes before Cecily entered with her aunt at her side. He began without greeting. You cannot remain here. Cecily Saturday, how fortunate that I already am. This is madness. After last night, every hour matters. Wycliffe declared before half the theatre that you would be his duchess. He declared something I had not accepted. Do not be childish. Aunt Elspeth's gaze sharpened. Choose another word. Martin swallowed it. Cecily, you have no idea what you risk. If you refuse him now, you will appear not dignified, but ungrateful. Worse, guilty. How efficient society is. It has made gratitude compulsory even for wounds it helps inflict. You are not listening. The family cannot survive more disgrace. Cecily looked at him then, and the quiet inside her became cold enough to trust. The family has survived for years on my silence. It will have to learn another income. His face changed. You think yourself wronged by me. I think myself used by you. There is a difference, though I understand why you prefer not to study it. I protected you. You protected the name Arden, provided I carried the cost where no one could see. Martin stepped closer, then stopped when Aunt Elspeth rose slightly from her chair. You must accept him, he said. Whatever his reasons, marriage to Wycliffe will end this. It would end discussion. Not truth. Truth will not pay debts. There it was. Not hidden now. Not even polished. Cecily felt no surprise, only a small grief for how little surprise remained possible. Whose debts? She asked. Martin's mouth closed. Aunt Elspeth watched him with the pleasureless attention of a hawk. You should return to Arden House before you make yourself impossible, he said. I have spent too many years being possible for other people. Cecily stood. I will not return today. I will not accept a proposal made without my consent. I will not let Lady Penrith's forged letter become the last word. If you came to command me, you have wasted a call. For one moment, Martin looked not angry, but afraid. Then he bowed too stiffly and left with the air of a man who had discovered a door locked from the wrong side. Cecily waited until the sound of his carriage had faded. Only then did her hands begin to tremble. Aunt Elspeth took them between her own. Bravery often arrives after the voice has already done the work. I did not feel brave. That is why it counts. The second decision came an hour later, when Cecily unfolded the forged opera letter beside the Penrith invitation Adrian had left in Aunt Elspeth's keeping. The paper did not merely resemble it. It matched in weight, surface, and faint impressed crest. The purple ink had dried with the same blue edge. A stationer would know, Cecily said. Aunt Elspeth looked up. Yes. A gentleman would send a clerk. Yes. A duke would make it a command. Almost certainly. Cecily folded the letter again. Then I shall go as a lady ordering charity stationery. Aunt Elspeth's smile was slow and approving. Wear the grey pelisse. It says respectability with no appetite for gossip. They went properly. Not alone, not furtively, and not like characters from a lurid novel. Aunt Elspeth's carriage took them to a stationer off Bond Street whose front window displayed invitation cards, sealing wafers, mourning borders, and delicate papers fit for people who wished their fossards to look expensive. Alice accompanied Cecily inside while Aunt Elspeth waited in the carriage with the authority of a woman who could enter at any moment and ruin a shopkeeper's peace. The stationer, Mr. Bell, bowed so often upon learning Cecily wished to inquire about stationery for a charity subscription that his head seemed in danger of separating from his neck. Cecily spoke first of account books, then of invitation cards, then of inks suitable for ladies' committees. She let him show her 3 blues, 2 browns, and a black so solemn it looked suited for funeral cards. Only then did she remove a blank corner torn from the forged letter, not the writing itself. I admired this shade when I saw it recently, she said. A purple with a blue undertone. Have you such an ink? Mr. Bell's fingers paused. Not long. Long enough. It is not commonly stocked, my lady. How disappointing. It is ordered privately for certain households. Then perhaps it would be inconvenient. She reached for her reticule. Lady Montford's committee may prefer another shop if special orders trouble you. The stationer paled. Not trouble, my lady. Not at all. We have supplied the shade by request. Penrith violet, some call it here, though not formally. Lady Penrith has a fondness for distinction in correspondence. Alice dropped her eyes, but Cecily saw the flash of recognition in the maid's face. How elegant, Cecily said. And the paper? She touched the sample. Mr. Bell had become cautious, but vanity helped where fear resisted. A fine laid sheet. Private cresting. Very costly. We keep such orders recorded, naturally. Naturally. Accuracy is the soul of charity accounts. He bowed again, relieved to return to harmless ground. Cecily ordered a modest packet of plain cream cards for the orphanage committee, paid from Aunt Elspeth's purse, and left with more than stationery. She had a name for the ink, confirmation of the paper, and the knowledge that Lady Penrith's elegance had made her careless. Adrian was waiting outside the shop. Not at the door. Across the street, beside a dark carriage, hat in hand, as though he had been walking there by coincidence and did not insult her intelligence by expecting her to believe it. Cecily paused on the pavement. "Your Grace." He bowed. "Lady Cecily. Lady Elspeth's carriage is visible from 3 directions. I thought that sufficient propriety. Did you follow me?" "I followed the possibility of danger." "Not you." "That is a lawyer's answer. It's the best I can manage while trying not to lie." The honesty almost undid her annoyance. "Almost. I asked you not to intervene." "I have not." "You are standing outside the stationer." "With uncommon discipline." Alice looked down with heroic seriousness. Cecily glanced toward the carriage, where Aunt Elspeth watched through the window with undisguised interest. "Lady Penrith ordered the ink and paper," Cecily said. "Mr. Bell confirmed it. Not as evidence in any court, but enough for a drawing room." Adrian's expression darkened. "Let me speak to her." No, the word came quickly. She saw it strike him, saw the instinct to argue rise and be mastered. "Not yet," she said. "If you confront her now, she will turn it into another tale of the Duke defending his chosen charity case." His hand tightened around his hat. "I despise that phrase." "So do I. Therefore we shall not help her prove it useful." "What would you have me do?" The question was low, strained, and important. Cecily looked at him across the few feet of London pavement between them. Carriages passed. A horse tossed its head. Somewhere, a boy called out newspapers with more enthusiasm than truth. "Wait," she said. "And let me choose the next step." For a moment, the old Duke returned to his face, the man used to solving by command. Then he bowed his head. "Then I will wait." It should not have moved her. Obedience to a reasonable request ought not to feel rare. Yet it did. Back at Lady Elspeth's house, Cecily found a calling card waiting on the silver tray in the hall. No message had been spoken to the servants. No visit requested. Only the card, delivered by hand and left in haste. "Miss Rosalie Penrith." Cecily turned it over. On the back, in a small, trembling hand, 7 words had been written. "My mother keeps the first draft." Miss Rosalie Penrith's calling card lay on Lady Elspeth's breakfast table like a small white flag that might still conceal a blade. Cecily had turned it over so many times that the edges had begun to soften beneath her fingers. "My mother keeps the first draft." 7 words. No signature beyond the printed name on the front. No explanation. No plea. Yet the trembling pressure of the handwriting had told Cecily more than a polished confession might have done. Rosalie was frightened, and frightened people rarely risked truth unless fear had become worse than silence. Aunt Elspeth read the message once, then placed it beside the forged opera letter and the Penrith invitation sample. A young woman does not send this unless she has been cornered. Cecily looked toward the window, where morning had laid a thin wash of light across the square. Or unless she wishes someone else to be cornered in her place. Possibly. But I remember her eyes at the park. So do I. That was the trouble. Cecily could mistrust Lady Penrith with clean precision, but Rosalie Penrith complicated the shape of guilt. She had carried her mother's name, stood beside her mother's schemes, and looked terrified each time the damage became real. Before Cecily could decide whether to answer the card, the footman entered. "Miss Penrith is below, my lady. She asks whether Lady Cecily will receive her for 5 minutes only." Aunt Elspeth's brows rose. 5 minutes is what people request when they know they deserve 3. Cecily folded her hands. Her pulse had quickened, though her voice remained calm. "Show her in." Rosalie entered wearing pale green and no confidence. Her bonnet ribbons were tied perfectly, her gloves immaculate, her face nearly bloodless. She curtsied to Aunt Elspeth, then to Cecily, and remained standing as if the chair offered to her might vanish if she trusted it. "Lady Cecily, I shouldn't have come." "Yet you did." "Yes." Her gaze flicked toward the door. Mamma believes I am with Lady Farrow and her daughters. Aunt Elspeth sat straighter. Then speak before Lady Farrow becomes unexpectedly industrious. Rosalie swallowed. I did not write on your dance card. Cecily did not answer at once. Silence, she had learned, often drew more truth than accusation. Rosalie's fingers twisted together. I copied the words. Not on the card. On a sheet Mamma gave me. She said I was to practice a hand unlike my own because we were playing a parlor game for a private amusement. I knew that was not true. I think I knew. I didn't ask enough. What words? Cecily asked. Rosalie's eyes filled. The cruel ones. The ones from the assembly. The room seemed to narrow around her confession. Aunt Elspeth's face hardened, but Cecily felt something stranger than anger. She felt pity, and resented that Lady Penrith had placed even pity where justice should have stood. And the opera letter? Rosalie shook her head quickly. I copied 2 lines from a draft. Mamma said she wished to see whether my hand could be made to resemble another lady's for a game of forfeits. Then she laughed and said young women must learn imitation if they hoped to survive marriage. Her voice faltered. I didn't know she would use it like that. I swear I didn't. Where is the draft now? Rosalie looked down. In Mamma's writing desk. The small drawer to the right. She keeps false starts there until she is certain no one will ask questions. Aunt Elspeth exchanged one swift look with Cecily. Can you bring it? Cecily asked. Rosalie went white. No. She would know. She knows when a ribbon has shifted in her chamber. She knows when I have breathed too quickly. The words came out before she could discipline them. Shame followed at once. Forgive me. I should not speak of my mother so. Some mothers earn accuracy more than loyalty, Aunt Elspeth said. Rosalie's mouth trembled. I don't want to hurt her. Cecily's voice softened despite herself. Then why come? The girl looked at her then, and youth fell away from her face. Because she is hurting you. Because when the Duke looked at you at the opera, I saw that he had done wrong and knew it. Mamma never knows it. She only knows whether she has one. The simplicity of that distinction struck Cecily. A man who had wounded and learned. A woman who wounded and arranged flowers over the mark. Cecily drew the forged letter toward her. If you are asked later, will you deny this visit? Rosalie's fear returned. I don't know. It was not brave. It was honest. Cecily nodded. Then do not promise what terror may steal from you. But do not send me any more riddles unless you are prepared for them to become answers. Rosalie flinched, then bowed her head. I'm sorry. I believe you. The girl looked up, startled. Cecily added, that is not the same as absolution. I understand. When Rosalie left, the room held her fear after her like perfume too heavy to disperse. Aunt Elspeth waited until the door closed. Well, Cecily touched the edge of the forged letter. We have truth, but not enough proof. Truth often arrives underdressed. Before Cecily could answer, another card was brought in. This one bore the Duke of Wycliffe's name. Aunt Elspeth considered the tray. Mayfair is unusually crowded for a house that was unfashionable last week. Adrian was shown into the drawing-room minutes later. He bowed first to Aunt Elspeth, then to Cecily, and his eyes went at once to the papers on the table. He did not ask to see them. Cecily noticed. Miss Penrith came here, she said. His face sharpened. Is she safe? The question surprised her. It should not have. For now. She says Lady Penrith keeps a first draft in her writing desk. Then we must obtain it lawfully or make her reveal it socially. You say that as though you have been practicing restraint. I have been failing at it privately in order to manage it publicly. Aunt Elspeth rose with the tact of a woman who intended to remain within hearing distance. I shall ask for fresh tea. Speak sensibly, or I shall return sooner than either of you prefers. She left the door open. Adrian waited until she had reached the adjoining room before he drew something from his coat. Cecily recognized the ivory dance card at once. The torn ribbon had been replaced with a narrow length of clean ivory silk, matched so carefully that the repair looked like reverence rather than concealment. The blank line remained empty. He set it on the table between them. "This belongs to you." Cecily looked at it, then at him. "You kept it. Longer than I had the right to. You repaired it. Only the ribbon." His voice lowered. "Not what was done." The words should not have moved her. They did. Repair was not erasure. Perhaps he understood that now. She picked up the card. The insult remained inside, folded away, but the outside looked whole. Not untouched. Whole. Why leave the final line blank? Because I have no right to write myself there. The answer landed softly. Cecily turned the card once in her hand. "At the opera, you forgot that." "I did." No defense. No appeal. "I told myself I was protecting you. I was truly protecting the idea that I could still undo harm by command. I despise bride bargaining, Lady Cecily. I despised seeing your name handled like a convenient solution. So I made myself judge, shield, and remedy all at once." That was pride wearing the coat of honor. She could hear the cost of the admission. She did not rush to ease it. "And now I would help you reveal the truth, if you permit it. Not because you owe me forgiveness. Not because I expect marriage. Because the wrong began with my carelessness, and the correction must not end with my convenience." Cecily held his gaze. In another man, such words might have sounded polished. In Adrian, they seemed carved from discomfort. "You are becoming difficult to dislike, Your Grace." Something warmed in his eyes, brief and carefully contained. "I don't wish to make any demand upon your generosity, but I am relieved to hear it." She almost smiled. "Almost. Do not be too relieved. I am still angry." "Good. Good. Anger has kept better faith with you than most people have." That struck too near the truth. Cecily looked back at the card to give herself a moment. From the hall came the sound of the knocker. Aunt Elspeth returned with a footman behind her carrying a silver tray. Upon it lay an invitation, thick, elegant, and edged in Lady Penrith's unmistakable taste. Cecily broke the seal. Lady Augusta Penrith requested the honor of Lady Cecily Arden's presence at a charity gathering in her drawing-room 2 evenings hence. The wording was gracious. The threat beneath it was not. Adrian read the change in her face. "What is it?" Cecily handed him the card. "A blade, Your Grace. Engraved and delivered by hand." Lady Elspeth took the invitation next and gave a small, humorless smile. "Then we shall have to decide whether to bleed quietly or make the blade explain itself." Cecily looked down at the repaired dance card, at the blank line waiting for a choice not yet made. "No," she said. "This time, Lady Penrith will explain." By the following morning, Lady Penrith's invitation had become more than a card on Lady Elspeth's writing table. It had become a room before it existed, full of watching faces, sharpened fans, and questions dressed as concern. Cecily could feel the shape of it while she sat with Aunt Elspeth beneath the pale light of the front parlour, the repaired ivory dance card lying beside the forged opera letter, the Penrith invitation, Rosalie's message, and the small packet of cream stationery purchased from Mr. Bell. The objects looked harmless in daylight. That was what unsettled her most. Harm rarely entered society with a raised fist. It arrived on good paper, with correct titles, sealed in wax and delivered by footmen. Aunt Elspeth read the invitation again, though Cecily knew she had memorized every word. "A charity gathering," she said. "How useful. Nothing disguises cruelty quite like benevolence." Cecily touched the edge of the card. "She means to make refusal look like guilt and attendance look like surrender. Then we must make attendance look like a choice." The word choice settled between them. Cecily had been turning it over in her mind since the opera, since Adrian's public claim, since the moment she had handed him back the dance card and felt the room mistake protection for resolution. She had no wish to be humiliated again. She had even less wish to be hidden until others decided how much humiliation she could survive. The footman entered with a troubled expression before either woman could speak again. "Mr. Arden, my lady." Aunt Elspeth did not look surprised. How persistent men become when a woman ceases to be convenient. Martin entered without waiting to be granted full permission, though he remembered to bow once he saw Cecily standing. His face bore the polished strain of a man who had slept poorly and blamed the world for it. "Cecily, I have been informed you mean to attend Lady Penrith's gathering. You have been informed quickly. This is not a jest." "No. I have found very little of the week amusing." His eyes went to the papers on the table, then away too fast. "You will not go." Aunt Elspeth lifted one brow. That sounded almost like authority. How nostalgic. Martin ignored her. "Lady Penrith is one of the most connected women in London. You have already caused enough confusion. If you appear there and provoke further talk, the Arden name may not recover. The Arden name has survived on my obedience long enough." "You speak as though obedience has wronged you." "No. People have." His jaw tightened. "You think yourself newly powerful because Wycliffe lost his head at the opera and declared for you. Do not mistake his guilt for devotion." Cecily felt the sentence enter and refused to settle. It might have hurt more if she had not already asked herself the same question in harsher words. "I am not mistaking anything. That is precisely why I have not accepted him." Martin stepped closer. "Then accept him now. Quietly. Send word today. Let the Duke announce a formal engagement before Lady Penrith can do more damage. A woman in your position cannot afford principle when rescue is offered." The room went still. Cecily stood very straight. "My position," she said, "is that of a woman who has been lied about, spoken for, displayed, pitted, and managed. I can afford principle better than I can afford one more person deciding that my silence would be useful." Martin's face reddened. "You do not understand the stakes." "I understand them too well. Your stakes are debts. Lady Penrith's stakes are control. His Grace's stakes are honor. Mine is the right to remain myself after all of you are finished arranging me." Aunt Elspeth set down her teacup with a soft click. "Beautifully stated." Martin looked at her with open resentment. "You encourage this recklessness because you enjoy defiance. You do not have to bear the consequences. I have borne consequences long enough to recognize cowardice when it borrows the language of prudence." Cecily saw Martin's gaze drop to the forged letter. His fear showed again, quick and revealing. "There is nothing to gain by accusing Lady Penrith without proof," he said. "Who mentioned accusation?" Cecily asked. He paused. "Too long." Aunt Elspeth noticed. Cecily did too. Martin recovered with effort. "I am saying only that respectable people do not enjoy being cornered." "No," Cecily said. "They prefer doing the cornering." The front knocker sounded before Martin could answer. Moments later, the Duke of Wycliffe was shown in. Adrian took in the room at a glance, Martin's flushed face, Aunt Elspeth's bright-eyed fury, Cecily standing beside the evidence laid out like a quiet indictment. He bowed with exact courtesy. "Lady Elspeth. Lady Cecily. Mr. Arden." Martin stiffened. "Your Grace, perhaps you can persuade my cousin to abandon this ruinous plan." Adrian looked at Cecily first, not Martin. The respect in that single choice loosened something beneath her ribs. "Is it ruinous?" he asked her. "It is dangerous." "That was not my question." "No," she said. "It is not ruinous." Only then did Adrian turn to Martin. "There is your answer." Martin stared. "You cannot mean to allow her to walk into Lady Penrith's drawing room and invite another public spectacle." "Allow is not a word I would choose." Adrian's voice remained calm. "Lady Cecily will decide whether she attends. I will decide whether London is permitted to treat her courage as spectacle." Martin gave a short, humorless laugh. "And how will you prevent that, Your Grace?" "By declaring another engagement before she has consented." The words struck the room with cruel accuracy. Adrian did not flinch, but his face changed. He bowed his head slightly toward Cecily. "I earned that accusation. I will not repeat the error." Martin seemed discomfited by the admission. Cecily was not. She was watching the Duke's hands, how still they remained at his sides, how carefully he held himself from seizing control of a room that would have yielded to him. "I have spoken with one of the footmen formally in Lady Penrith's service," Adrian said. "Formally?" Aunt Elspeth asked. "Dismissed this morning. Without wages owed." He carried a folded sheet from Lady Penrith's writing desk to a messenger on the night of the opera. He did not see the full contents, but he saw the violet ink, and he recognized the pressed crest. Cecily felt the air tighten. Will he say so? Not before magistrates, and I would not drag him into that without cause. But he will answer me in a private social setting if he is protected from being ruined for honesty. Martin gave a sound of impatience. A servant's word against Lady Penrith? Useless. Adrian looked at him. Not if it explains what other evidence already shows. Cecily considered the chain. The dance card. The forged letter. The stationer. Rosalie's warning. The footman. None alone would crush Lady Penrith. Together, in the right room, before people who understood social timing better than law, they could make denial dangerous. You should let me confront her, Adrian said quietly. Cecily looked at him. There it was, the instinct beneath all his improvement, not cruel now but still powerful. The wish to stand between her and the blow. No, his jaw tightened once, then eased. I thought you would say that. Yet you asked. I hoped I had become less predictable. You have. That is why I answer plainly instead of leaving the room. Aunt Elspeth looked between them with the expression of a woman watching two armies discover diplomacy. Adrian stepped closer, though not too close for propriety. If you go, she will attempt to make you lose composure. Then I shall disappoint her. She may use the opera letter again. Then I shall ask where she first saw the words she claims to pity. His gaze sharpened. The timeline. Yes. At the assembly, she knew the sentence before the card was read. At the opera, she arrived prepared to interpret a letter no innocent person should have expected. For the first time that morning, Adrian's expression warmed not with tenderness, but with admiration. You have already chosen your first strike. Question, she corrected. A strike sounds too masculine for a drawing room. I shall ask a question and let her wound herself answering. Aunt Elspeth smiled. My dear, that is far more feminine and much more lethal. Martin looked from Cecily to Adrian and seemed to understand that the room had moved beyond him. That frightened him more than anger had. You are all mad, he said. No, Cecily replied. Merely finished. He left soon after, claiming business that no one believed in. When the door closed behind him, Adrian exhaled slowly, as if he had been restraining more than words. Lady Cecily, I can arrange for the footman to attend under my protection. I can ensure your aunt's carriage is not delayed. I can stand where you can see me. But I will not speak before you ask me to. She studied him. And if I falter, then I will stand nearer. Not louder. The answer reached her before she could defend against it. She picked up the ivory dance card and slipped it into her glove, where the smooth edge rested against her palm like a memory and a promise. Then come beside me, Your Grace. Not before me. His voice softened. Beside you. 2 evenings later, Penrith House blazed with light against the London dusk. Carriages lined the street. Footmen moved beneath lanterns. Inside, music and conversation drifted through open windows, polished and merciless. Cecily stepped down from Aunt Elspeth's carriage in a gown of deep blue silk, the repaired ribbon hidden beneath her glove, the forged letter in her reticule, and her fear held so tightly it had no room to show. Adrian waited at the foot of the steps, formal, silent, and exactly where he had promised to be. He offered his arm. She took it. Together, neither shielded nor surrendered, they entered Lady Penrith's house. Penrith House received its guests with the polished grace of a household trained to conceal knives beneath flowers. Every lamp in the front hall had been lit, every mirror angled to multiply candlelight, every servant placed as if stillness itself had been arranged by rank. Cecily felt the attention strike before she crossed the threshold. It came from the stairs, the corridor, the open doors of the drawing-room ahead, where titled guests had gathered under the pretense of charity and the appetite of a trial. Adrian's arm was steady beneath her gloved hand. He did not press. He did not guide her forward as if she were fragile. He simply matched her pace, and that restraint gave her more strength than any display of possession could have done. Aunt Elspeth walked on Cecily's other side, black silk rustling softly, her expression composed enough to frighten anyone who understood her. Remember, she murmured, low enough for Cecily alone, a room is only a room until one allows it to become a throne. Cecily's fingers closed briefly over the ivory dance card hidden inside her glove. Then I shall remain standing. They entered together. Conversation thinned, stretched, then faltered. The drawing room was full. Lady Montfort stood near the mantel with two dowagers who had rediscovered interest in Cecily only after scandal made her name useful. Lord Ellingham hovered beside a pier table, trying to look impartial and failing by the direction of his eyes. Several young ladies sat in a crescent near the pianoforte, whispering behind fans. At the centre of the room, Lady Penrith shone in pale silver, serene, elegant, and entirely prepared. Rosalie stood beside her in white muslin, her face colourless, her hands folded so tightly that Cecily feared the lace at her cuffs would tear. When Lady Penrith saw Adrian's arm beneath Cecily's hand, her smile deepened by the smallest measure. It was not defeat. It was adjustment. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying with exquisite control. "Lady Cecily. Lady Elspeth. How gracious of you to come." Graciousness seemed expected, Aunt Elspeth replied. "We are all slaves to fashion." A few people pretended not to hear. Adrian bowed, but he did not answer for Cecily. That silence was the first test, and he passed it. Lady Penrith turned her attention fully upon Cecily. "I feared, after the unfortunate confusion at the opera, that you might prefer rest. Delicate spirits often require it after public distress." Cecily let the insult settle where the room could see it, then stepped past it without lifting her voice. "How kind of you to consider my spirit, Lady Penrith. It has proved less delicate than expected." A faint current moved through the guests. Lady Penrith's smile did not change. Adversity does sometimes lend strength. Though one hopes it does not encourage misinterpretation. In painful situations, women may mistake compassion for devotion, and concern for promise. There it was. Not accusation, not yet. A net cast with silk thread. Several eyes shifted toward Adrian. He remained silent. Cecily felt the effort in him, not because he moved, but because he did not. Lady Penrith gestured toward Rosalie. "My daughter has been assisting with our charity accounts. Young women must be taught usefulness early, before sentiment misleads them." Rosalie lowered her eyes. Adrian's jaw tightened, but no word escaped him. Cecily glanced once at him. He saw the glance and understood. "Not yet." Lady Penrith moved toward a table where donation lists had been arranged for display. "We gather tonight for benevolence." Still, one cannot help reflecting how reputation, like charity, must be handled carefully. Too much given in the wrong direction may encourage dependence. "Or gratitude," Lord Ellingham murmured, eager to attach himself to safety. Aunt Elspeth looked at him. "Lord Ellingham, do not injure yourself by adding meaning." He retreated behind his teacup. Lady Penrith's eyes glittered. "I speak only generally, of course. Yet London has lately been troubled by a sad little drama. A lady, wounded by time and circumstance, might understandably hope a great man's pity could become something more permanent." Cecily heard the whisper begin. She also heard, beneath it, Rosalie's small, unsteady breath. The room expected her to defend herself. That was the trap. Defense could sound like desperation. Outrage could look like guilt. Tears would become proof. Cecily did none of those things. She walked to the donation table and placed one gloved hand upon its edge, not claiming it, only steadying herself beside it. "Lady Penrith," she said, "may I ask you a question?" The simplicity of it created more silence than an accusation would have done. Lady Penrith inclined her head. "If it will ease you, certainly. When did you first read His Grace's private words?" The room stilled so completely that the candles seemed loud. Lady Penrith's fan paused halfway open. "I beg your pardon." At the assembly, Cecily said, her voice clear and calm, "A sentence was written upon my dance card. You expressed sympathy afterward. Before that, however, you had already spoken with His Grace. You had heard his words. So I ask again, when did you first read them?" The word "read" landed gently, almost politely. That made it more dangerous. Lady Penrith recovered with admirable speed. My dear Lady Cecily, grief has confused you. I heard of the vulgar inscription as everyone else did, when the card was discovered. Then you had not seen the words before the card was read aloud? Of course not. How curious. Lady Penrith's eyes narrowed. Curious? Yes. At the opera, you interpreted the forged letter before anyone had shown it to you. The air shifted again. People who had come to enjoy a ruin discovered they might be standing near the wrong edge. Lady Penrith gave a soft laugh. Forged is a strong word for a letter that bore your name. Cecily removed the folded paper from her reticule and held it, still closed. Names are easily borrowed by those who cannot earn trust. A murmur rose. Lady Penrith turned to Adrian with sudden appeal. Your Grace, surely you cannot allow this distressing performance. Lady Cecily has suffered embarrassment, and I pity her deeply. But pity cannot be permitted to make a gentleman blind. Adrian's eyes remained on Cecily. Lady Cecily has not asked me to speak. The answer moved through the room like a door quietly opening. Cecily felt it in her chest. He had chosen obedience over display. He had chosen to stand beside, not before. Lady Penrith heard it too. Her face did not crack, but something hardened behind her eyes. Then perhaps I must speak plainly where others are too delicate. A woman nearing the end of her hopes may do desperate things. A dance card can be marked by its owner. A letter can be written and denied. A duke's compassion can be cultivated until it resembles obligation. No one wishes to say it, but society must protect gentlemen as well as ladies. Rosalie made a small sound. Lady Penrith's hand found her daughter's wrist. Rosalie, compose yourself. Cecily looked at the girl. Rosalie's lips parted, but no words came. Not yet. Fear had its own etiquette. Cecily would not spend the girl's courage before she chose to give it. You suggest, Cecily said, that I wrote cruelty about myself upon my own card, then forged a letter in my own name, then arranged for both to humiliate me in the two most public rooms of the week. Lady Penrith lifted her chin. Desperation is seldom elegant. No, Cecily replied. But yours has been. The room inhaled. Lady Penrith's fan snapped closed. For the first time, anger broke through the polish. Take care, Lady Cecily. I have taken care for 12 years. That is why I am still standing. She reached into her glove and drew out the repaired ivory dance card. The pale surface caught the candlelight. Several women leaned forward despite themselves. This card was taken from my wrist at the assembly. The ribbon was torn. The inscription was written in purple ink. She placed the forged opera letter beside it on the table. This letter was passed through the opera boxes in purple ink on Penrith paper. Lady Penrith's laugh returned, thinner now. Many ladies enjoy distinctive inks. Indeed. That is why I visited Mr. Bell, the stationer, under the excellent guidance of my aunt. Aunt Elspeth smiled like a drawn blade. A most educational outing. Lady Penrith's gaze flickered. Briefly. Enough. Cecily saw it. So did Adrian. So did Lord Ellingham, who was not clever but had a coward's sensitivity to changing wind. You have no proof, Lady Penrith said. You have grief, resentment, and a duke's misplaced loyalty. Perhaps, Cecily said. Or perhaps I have only begun. Lady Penrith turned sharply toward the nearest footman. The room has become overwarm. Close the doors. No one need be drawn into further unpleasantness. The footman hesitated. It was a mistake. A small one, but Cecily noticed the fear in his eyes. Adrian noticed too. He stepped forward at last. Not in front of Cecily. Beside her. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room with the authority Lady Penrith had tried to imitate all evening. No one leaves until Lady Cecily has finished. For one suspended moment, Penrith House forgot how to breathe. The footman stood with his hand half lifted toward the drawing-room doors. Lady Penrith's command still hung in the air, elegant and useless. Adrian had not raised his voice, yet the room obeyed the shape of his authority as if it had been carved into the walls. Cecily felt him beside her, not before her, and the difference steadied every part of her that fear had tried to loosen. Lady Penrith turned slowly. "Your Grace," she said, her smile thin enough to cut paper, "I hardly think my guests need be detained for a scene born of distress." "Then we shall make it brief," Cecily replied. Her voice sounded calm. She was grateful and faintly astonished. She placed the ivory dance card on the table beside the forged opera letter. The two objects looked almost delicate under the candles. "This was taken from my wrist at the assembly. This was passed through the opera boxes. Both were written in the same purple ink. Both used words or suggestions that could damage me while seeming to pity me. Both appeared only after Lady Penrith had reason to prefer that His Grace's attention be turned elsewhere." Lady Penrith laughed softly. "You mistake coincidence for conspiracy." "No," Aunt Elspeth said. "Coincidence has less expensive stationery." A nervous ripple moved through the room. Cecily took the small sample card from Mr. Bell's shop from her reticule. Mr. Bell confirmed that the ink is privately ordered for Penrith correspondence. He also confirmed the paper stock, including the impressed crest. "A tradesman will say many things to please a titled lady," Lady Penrith said. "How fortunate," Cecily answered, "that I am not the only titled lady he has pleased." Adrian reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded statement, sealed but not theatrically displayed. "My clerk visited Mr. Bell after Lady Cecily did. The account books show the same paper and ink sent to this house 2 days before the assembly and again the morning of the opera." Lady Penrith's eyes flashed. "This is intolerable." "No," Rosalie whispered. The word was so small that at first only those nearest heard it. Lady Penrith turned sharply. "Rosalie." The girl flinched, but she did not lower her eyes. Something in Cecily's chest tightened. Rosalie looked younger than ever and braver than anyone had allowed her to become. "I copied the first practice lines," she said. "Mamma told me it was for a parlour game. She said I must learn another hand." Lady Penrith's face became very still. "My daughter is overwrought." "I'm frightened," Rosalie said, her voice shaking. "I'm not overwrought." The room altered. It did not become kind, but it became attentive in a new way. Truth, once spoken by the person least expected to speak, had a way of rearranging power. Cecily looked at Rosalie, and though she did not absolve her, she gave the girl the dignity of being believed. "Did you write on my dance card?" Rosalie shook her head. "No. I copied the sentence once on plain paper. Mamma kept it. I did not know she would use it." "And the opera letter?" Adrian asked gently. Rosalie swallowed. "I copied 2 lines. Not the whole letter. I saw the draft later in Mamma's desk, with Lady Cecily's name practiced beneath it." Lady Penrith stepped forward. "Enough. You foolish child, you do not understand what you are saying." "I do," Rosalie said. Tears stood in her eyes, but her voice remained audible. "For once, I do." A sound came from the doorway. The footman who had hesitated earlier stood pale and rigid, his gaze fixed upon the carpet. Adrian turned slightly. "Thomas Reed, you will not be dismissed or left without wages for telling the truth in this room. You have my word." The footman bowed, visibly trembling with the strain of addressing so many fine people. "I carried a folded sheet from her ladyship's writing desk the night of the opera, Your Grace. Purple writing. Same pressed paper. I was told to give it to a messenger at the side entrance of the theatre." Lady Penrith's fan snapped against her palm. "A dismissed servant inventing tales for profit." Adrian's voice cooled. "He was dismissed this morning after my clerk asked him about the errand. His wages are still owed." Several older ladies looked at Lady Penrith then, and their faces shifted from curiosity to social calculation. Unpaid servants did not move hearts, but they did damage reputations when combined with forgery and failed cunning. Lord Ellingham edged half a step away from Lady Penrith's circle. Lady Montford pressed a hand to her throat. Aunt Elspeth looked as though she had expected no less from the world and intended to correct it anyway. The drawing-room doors opened again before Lady Penrith could answer. Mr. Martin Arden stood there, drawn by alarm, gossip, or the instinct of a debtor sensing danger. His entrance might have gone unnoticed if his face had not revealed too much when he saw the evidence on the table. Cecily turned to him. "How convenient that you have arrived." Martin attempted a bow. "I came when I heard there was unpleasantness." "Cecily, this cannot continue." "No," she said. "It ends now. Did Lady Penrith hold your notes of debt?" His mouth opened. Nothing came. Lady Penrith's expression hardened into warning. Adrian spoke, not loudly. "Answer, Lady Cecily." Martin looked around the room and understood that silence had lost its price. "There were temporary obligations," he said. "Investments that turned." "Debts," Aunt Elspeth corrected. "Debts," he snapped, then collected himself. Lady Penrith suggested that if His Grace's attentions were directed properly, the matter might be resolved without public embarrassment. Cecily felt no surprise. That was the final sadness of it. Directed properly toward Rosalie. Martin's silence answered. Lady Penrith lifted her chin. "I sought only to protect my daughter's future against a woman who invited pity and mistook it for love." Adrian stepped forward then, still beside Cecily but with the full weight of his rank behind each word. "No. You sought to break a woman's reputation because I noticed her after insulting her. You used my carelessness, Mr. Arden's debt, your daughter's fear, and a servant's dependence. You mistook cruelty for strategy because society has rewarded you too long for politeness." Lady Penrith paled, but pride held her upright. "You will regret speaking so to me. I regret only that my first words gave you a weapon." He turned to the room. "Let every person here understand this clearly. The original insult was mine. I spoke with arrogance. I spoke as though a woman's worth could be measured by the years society had failed to choose her. Lady Cecily suffered because I allowed my contempt for a bargain to fall upon a person who deserved respect." Cecily looked at him. The room listened. This was not rescue. It was confession. Lady Penrith will receive no patronage, recommendation, or social support from Wycliffe House, Adrian continued. "Any committee under my influence will be informed why. Miss Penrith will be escorted to her aunt in Bath, if she wishes it, with protection for her allowance. Mr. Reed will receive his wages and a place in my household if he wants one. As for Mr. Arden, my solicitor will review every account connected to Lady Cecily's personal funds. Anything misused will be restored." Martin's face went grey. "You cannot interfere in family matters." Cecily looked at him calmly. "You made my life a family matter whenever it profited you. You shall not object now that truth has entered the room." The words gave her more relief than anger. Lady Penrith stood isolated in the very drawing room she had prepared as a trap. No one rushed to her side. That was society's mercy. It abandoned with the same elegance it once flattered. Rosalie began to cry quietly, not with spectacle, but with release. Aunt Elspeth went to her and took her hand. Cecily watched, and the last knot of bitterness inside her loosened a fraction. Justice did not require cruelty to every person near the guilty. It required accuracy. Adrian turned back to Cecily. The room was still full of witnesses, but his eyes made the moment smaller, almost private. "Lady Cecily, I have asked you wrongly before. I asked from guilt. I claimed from fear. I tried to repair with power what I had damaged with pride." He drew the ivory dance card from the table and held it not as evidence now, but as something entrusted. "I ask again, and you may refuse me before every person here. I will honor that refusal as publicly as I ask." Cecily's breath caught. The final blank line waited beneath his thumb. "Do you ask because I was wronged," she said, "or because I am wanted?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you're wanted, honored, and free to refuse me." The room vanished to the edge of her awareness. Cecily saw only the man who had wounded her, learned the shape of the wound, and chosen to stand in truth without demanding absolution as payment. She saw the blank line that had once mocked her. She saw that it had not been waiting for a man to complete it. It had been waiting for her choice. "Then write your name, Your Grace," she said softly. His hand was not entirely steady when he took the small pencil from the card's ribbon and wrote Adrian Lockhart on the final line. When he offered the pencil to her, Cecily wrote one word beneath it. Yes. Only then did she place her hand in his. The room remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of judgment. It was the stunned quiet of people watching a woman they had underestimated choose the terms of her own joy. By the time Cecily first saw Stonemere Hall as Duchess of Wycliffe, summer had softened the English countryside into green abundance, and the road unfurled before the carriage like a promise made in daylight. 3 months had passed since the night at Penrith House, 3 months in which London had done what London always did. It had gasped, judged, corrected itself, and pretended it had known the truth all along. Lady Penrith's drawing-room had grown quieter with each week. Invitations that once flew toward her house now took more careful routes elsewhere. Her name still appeared in conversation, but with the delicate hesitation reserved for people whose power had proved less permanent than their pride. Mr. Martin Arden had discovered that solicitors could be as relentless as creditors, and less easily charmed. Funds belonging to Cecily's late mother had been restored under Adrian's supervision and Aunt Elspeth's merciless attention. Arden House, no longer able to feed upon Cecily's silence, had become smaller in every sense that mattered. Rosalie had gone to Bath to live with her mother's sister, where her letters, though cautious at first, had begun to contain longer sentences, then opinions, and finally the fragile beginnings of laughter. The latest one rested in Cecily's lap as the carriage turned between 2 stone pillars and entered the long drive to Stonemere Hall. Adrian sat opposite her, though in marriage he had not become less formal so much as more freely himself. He watched her face rather than the estate, as though the house mattered only if it pleased her. "You are very quiet," he said. Cecily looked past him to where the hall rose beyond a sweep of lawn, its grey stone warmed by afternoon light, its windows catching the sky. It was not pretty in the shallow way some houses were pretty. It was old, broad-shouldered, and calm, with ivy climbing one wing and a terrace overlooking gardens that seemed to have been waiting years for someone to walk them without hurry. "I was deciding whether to be intimidated," she said. "And the house is trying very hard." His mouth softened. "It has had generations of practice. Then I shall have to disappoint it gradually. I'm confident you will manage magnificently." The carriage stopped before the entrance, where the household had gathered in proper rows. Cecily had expected ceremony. She had not expected the strange ache that rose in her throat when the housekeeper curtsied and said, "Welcome home, Your Grace." Not welcome to Stonemere. Not welcome to His Grace's estate. Home. The word had weight. 4 years, home had meant responsibility, dim rooms, unpaid accounts, her mother's fading voice, Martin's instructions, and the careful management of appearances. Here, the word stood open before her, not empty, not demanding, but waiting. Cecily stepped down with Adrian's hand steady beneath hers. The servants bowed and curtsied. She looked at them not as an audience to impress, but as people whose lives were tied to this house, whose loyalty would not be won by a title alone. "Thank you," she said. "I hope to deserve that welcome." The housekeeper's face changed, just slightly. Respect, Cecily had learned, did not always arrive as a grand gesture. Sometimes it was the softening of a woman's eyes when she realized she had not been spoken past. Inside, Stonemere smelled faintly of beeswax, lavender, and old wood warmed by sun. Portraits lined the hall, Wycliffe faces stern beneath their powdered hair and military coats, but Cecily did not feel judged by them. Perhaps she had spent too long beneath living judgment to fear painted ancestors. Adrian showed her the morning room, the library, the west terrace, and the small parlour that had belonged to his grandmother. He did not announce what she would do with each space. He asked. That made all the difference. Within a fortnight, the small parlour became the beginning of Cecily's first true work as Duchess. Not a fashionable charity designed to flatter donors, but a patronage circle for women's society preferred to misplace. Widows with reduced incomes. Unmarried daughters past their first youth. Poor relations who managed households without recognition. Women who knew how to stretch money, soothe tempers, teach children, keep accounts, and survive being called unfortunate by people with less courage. Cecily wrote the invitations herself. Aunt Elspeth, upon receiving the first, sent back a note that read, "At last, a committee worth dressing for." Adrian read it aloud at breakfast and laughed with such unguarded warmth that Cecily paused over her tea to watch him. He noticed. "What is it?" he asked. "You laugh more here. I breathe more here." Then, after a moment, "You brought that with you." She lowered her eyes to her cup, not because she was embarrassed, but because happiness still required privacy sometimes. The weeks settled into a rhythm that was not dramatic enough for gossip, which made it all the more precious. Rosalie wrote from Bath that her aunt had allowed her to choose her own books. Mr. Reed, the footman from Penrith House, accepted a place in Adrian's household and proved so careful with correspondence that the steward praised him within a month. Lady Penrith attempted once to re-enter a prominent committee through an old acquaintance, only to find Lady Montford suddenly firm, Aunt Elspeth suddenly present, and every chair mysteriously filled. Martin sent one letter full of wounded dignity and received a reply from Cecily that was brief, courteous, and entirely free of apology. She slept well after posting it. One evening, after a dinner with neighboring families, Cecily wandered into the portrait gallery while the lamps still burned low along the walls. She had worn ivory silk, not because it was bridal, but because she liked the way it caught candlelight without asking permission. At the far end of the gallery, inside a small glass case Adrian had commissioned without ceremony, lay the ivory dance card. The torn ribbon had been preserved beside the repaired one. The purple words remained hidden inside, folded away, not erased. The final line, however, was visible. Adrian Lockhart. Beneath it, in her own hand, yes. Cecily stood before it for a long while. She did not hear Adrian approach until his reflection appeared in the glass beside hers. "I wondered if you would hate seeing it kept," he said. "I thought I might." "And do you?" She considered the question honestly. The card no longer felt like the night of the assembly. It no longer belonged to Lady Penrith, or to the laughing gentleman, or to the room that had waited to see whether she would break. It belonged to the woman who had taken it back. "No," she said. "I think some wounds should be remembered after they stop bleeding. Otherwise, people call survival exaggeration." Adrian's gaze lowered. "Do you ever regret saying yes?" The question was quiet, but she heard the old guilt beneath it, the part of him that still returned sometimes to his first mistake as if remorse could travel backward and stand guard. Cecily turned from the glass. "I did not marry the man who wounded me." His face tightened. She touched his sleeve, gently enough that he looked at her. "I married the man who had the courage to repair the wound before the world, and then the humility to keep repairing it afterward." His breath left him slowly. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that distinction." "Do not spend all of it trying. Some of it must be lived." He covered her hand with his, not possessively, not publicly, but with the quiet gratitude of a man who understood that trust was not granted once and finished. It was chosen again in small, ordinary moments. From beyond the gallery windows, the lawns darkened into evening. Somewhere below, servants moved through the house with the soft confidence of routine. Tomorrow, Cecily would meet with 2 widows about annuities, write to Rosalie, and argue with the gardener about whether the south border required more lavender. Life, in its great mercy, had become specific. Adrian opened the glass case and took out the card. "There is something I added," he said. "On the back." Cecily accepted it. The ivory was cool in her hand, smooth as memory. She turned it over. In Adrian's precise hand, beneath the faint mark where the old ribbon had once been tied, he had written, "The first dance was not the beginning." Her choice was. Cecily read the words twice. Then she closed the card gently and placed it back in the case. Outside, night settled over Stonemere Hall, not as an ending, but as shelter. The house no longer seemed to be testing her. It was holding her. And for the first time in all her years of being useful, patient, overlooked, and finally seen, Cecily did not stand at the edge of the room waiting to be chosen. She stood at the heart of her own home, beside the man who loved her, with the quiet certainty that the empty line had never been empty at all. It had been waiting for her hand.